call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, April 6, 2026, and the time is 5:15. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Our next item is the agenda approval. Is there a motion to accept the agenda as presented? Okay, moved by Jeff. Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Corey. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. We do not have public comment at this meeting as it is a special meeting, so we will move on to items for individual action. And tonight we have bids for the Northfield High School Reimagine project with Sal Bagley with Wold Architects and Josh Cooper with Knutson Construction. We'll discuss the outcome of the bidding process for the Reimagine Northfield High School project. The board is requested to approve 4 of the 23 trade packages. We'll hear more in a minute. Package contracts at a total award of $26,523,160. This is an item for action, and so what I'm going to do is take a motion, and then we will discuss after the presentation. So is there a motion to approve the 4 trade packages, package contracts as detailed in the memorandum, which is posted on our website?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Corey. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay, we will take a vote after presentation and discussion. Welcome, Sal and Josh.
Good evening.
Good evening. So thank you for having us here tonight for, I guess it was a special meeting, probably just for us, but I know you've got other items on the agenda. So we're here to talk about our bid day results. So bid day was on the 26th, March 26th at 2 o'clock. We opened up 77 bids over 23 separate bid packages. And, you know, may seem like a lot as 77 bids, but, you know, we were hopeful to get more participation, closer to 100. That didn't happen based on kind of, you know, what everybody's got going for bidding timelines. And even some of these packages, we only got 1 or 2 bids, which was unfortunate. In addition to kind of the lack of participation in a few scopes, we also had a handful of scopes that were well over our budget. That was disappointing, but at any rate, in the past week, the district, Knutson and Wold have been going through a deep dive on, you know, where the overages were, why the overages occurred, and in conjunction with that, we've been identifying areas that will give us the opportunity to either rebid and adjust design if needed, and you know, modifying some of the sequencing on the way we put out to bidders to build the building over the next 3.5 years. You know, we're still remain committed to providing a good quality project here and do it on a time per our overall project schedule. That's why we're here to kind of, or to recommend the award today for those 4 scopes that you're have listed in front of you: concrete, precast, roofing, and the earthwork and utilities scope. These 4 packages are definitely kind of mission critical, if you will, or on critical path to maintain our schedule overall, with the bulk of that being the earthwork contractor that will start over the summer. With that, maybe do you have any other comments you want to hit on, or?
No, I think we've reported to you in our various updates about the project progress that we do, budget updates or budget estimates all throughout the process. So both Wold and Knutson do that. And there have been times throughout the project that we were estimating to be high and worked with the district on some value engineering ideas or breaking things out into alternates. But none of those estimates really forecasted exactly how bid day was going to go. So we're working on that, like Josh said, kind of action plan forward. When it comes to rebidding, that could look kind of 2 different ways. You know, we could change the way things are packaged and maybe rebid relatively soon. So take bids again. I think what's more likely is that we would want to make any associated design changes and then go back out for bid for a few scopes. And I don't know if you were gonna get to it, but I think there's a few scopes we're actually probably ready to recommend for award even next week that we've done further vetting, so.
Yeah, we've looked at 3 other scopes that we feel comfortable with even next week. The reason, those didn't get on this agenda was timing with the best value process. Curtain wall glazing, electrical, and geothermal would be the ones that we would be comfortable with next week. And potentially a couple more. It kind of depends on how we decide here going forward on, direction of scope. So.
Are there any questions or?
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Hammond, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I appreciate that we're talking about the challenges with a few of these packages. I mean, the vast majority of the packages came in at where you thought they would. You're really talking about 4 packages that were not competitive and came over significantly over budget. But we need to frame for the community what we're talking about. So would you please outline the total overage so that everybody is on the same page with where we're at? Because I think it's important for people to know that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, we're trending, 20% over on overall. And those packages specifically that really hit us were mechanical, and we only had a couple bidders for steel and masonry. There's a number of things that can go into why either contractors didn't bid, as well as things kind of outside of our control as well, with the way steel prices are, the way gas prices are. Really in the last 6 to 8 weeks have fluctuated quite a bit.
Also heard from a lot of bidders about increased pressure of other big project types in the area, namely data centers.
Any questions from the board members?
Okay.
Ben? Oh, you wanted to add
You go
more?
ahead, Ben.
Sure. So that's helpful context, but when we look at kind of a strategy for those where we got a single bid or it was significantly over, obviously we're struggling with some of the macroeconomic and realities of the environment that we're in right now. What is kind of the go forward then from your thinking as we look at those particular bid items?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. We talked about resequencing certain aspects of the project. This can help break up, how a bidder looks at a certain scope, which encourages more people to bid on items. We've talked about, like the steel package, breaking that up a little bit differently so that we get a supplier and installer to help with being more competitive. We combine them because we've had success with that in the past. By breaking that package up specifically, we can get more suppliers and more bidders or installers to take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, could you, for those of us that aren't in the construction field, when you talk about repackaging and kind of resequencing, what is that? Like in practical terms, what would that look like for steel, let's say?
So repackaging would be, we combine the supply and install the steel together, breaking them apart so that more people, 3 or 4 bidders would bid on the supply versus 3 or 4, bidding on the install. Some of the feedback that we received, at least on that specific scope at bid time, was timing on who was going to take the lead on that particular scope. When you don't have a good match up there, it drops a lot of people, is what we've seen. As far as the resequencing, we've got a couple challenging spots, specifically like the fax lab, where it can't really attack it, or we attack it before the building's demoed. That's the way it was bid. Well, when you talk about getting equipment into the courtyard and lifting air handling units and steel, that drives some costs up. So we've looked at potentially doing that later, where it times out better with not having to use or use all that as heavy equipment to access that area.
One more?
1.5. So when we kind of look at that, any concerns about, just further delaying some of the bids on that, just given kind of the uncertainty of the economic environment that we're in? And then, are there enough entities within the state eligible to bid on those that we would expect to see sort of an appreciable difference in terms of repackaging or kind of resequencing, if you will?
What do you think of that? Go ahead.
There are a lot of steel suppliers and steel erectors, so it was disappointing to only get one bid on bid day. So now how each of their capacity is will be something we have to continue to talk about, and if this would be more attractive to them. But we did speak with several who, an erector who didn't have a supply number and vice versa, right? So, I think that's true. Do you want to talk about price increases, though? I think that one's a one to watch.
So as I mentioned, the pricing, fuel has doubled for trucking and everything else that's done just in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Steel prices, for the way some of these data centers are requesting and able, private entities that want to have their project move way ahead of yours, they're paying a premium for it. And, I think that you wait 30 days, you wait 60 days, that price of steel probably isn't going to plummet. Maybe it plateaus where it's at, but there's a risk of increase as well.
Kind of fighting against that risk, right?
Yeah, I just want to provide a little additional context to what Josh and Sal have shared, because this is really important for, we have a strategic commitment to communication. We want people to know exactly where we're at. So you've heard, that they came in 20% over. That is $19 million. Let's be really clear about that. I want to emphasize a handful of things that we believe to be the reasons for that, because I just want to share with the community too that Knudsen and Wold are experienced with this. They have, as you know, they've done multiple checks along the way with people who would be in the bidding process. We attended the pre-bid walkthrough, and as they said, there were numerous companies that were there that ended up not bidding, for some reason. But the three reasons that we really see behind this is that I don't think the average person, even I didn't understand totally the impact of petroleum products on construction. Right? It's not just about gas, it's about all of the other things. And we just know the global instability, specifically with the conflict in the Middle East, is creating an issue. We know that for sure. In addition, we know that the tariffs are increasing costs, and that's still creating the market instability. And then I think this part about the data centers is something I also didn't quite understand its impact on the market, but you even see the Minnesota legislature taking this up because of the rapid proliferation of data centers. In fact, trying to eliminate non-disclosure agreements from local governmental agencies. So I think that just shows the pressure that's being placed on that market. And then, I just think we are going to respond, right? So as we are doing this project, right? And so we're moving ahead, and we have three things that we're going to do. Number one is we are looking at rebidding some of these pieces. Number two, we are looking at design changes. We have to be very clear about that. And the third piece is that, as you heard, when we had a really good bond sale day a year ago, we are around $4 million ahead in earned interest than what we had projected. So that is $4 million that we hoped would have been value add to the project, right? But now it could be something that we could use to protect the project. In addition, we typically, with these kinds of projects in the past, with the 2018 bond, we waited to determine how much of the project would we fund with long-term facilities maintenance revenue. The vast majority, a lot of this project, I'm not going to say the vast majority, a lot of this project does qualify for long-term facilities maintenance revenue, which means that we can use that pre-existing funding and direct this toward the project. So what I want to share with you is this is not great, right? It's discouraging. We have to be straight up about that. And at the same time, we know that we have people who have been through this before, and we are going to respond with these three, if not more, ways to do that. And, we're going to deliver something that people will be really proud of. I want to be really clear, too, is that we will not use any unrestricted general fund dollars for this project, right? So that's when we talk about the budget, when you had budget prioritization last year, that is not the account that we would use to fund this. So we just want to provide that additional context. I really appreciate the way that Josh and Knudsen and Sal and Wold have responded in this circumstance. We've had a great run of excellent bid days. And just to give one more example about market instability, in February, we bid a much smaller project, $350,000 at the NCEC. But that budget came in 29% less than what was projected, right? So a smaller project, but it does show the instability that we have in the market right now. So I just want to thank our partners and share with the community that, we are not pleased, right? And at the same time, we are going to move forward together. And so we will solve the problems ahead of us, and we're going to take the actions that are necessary to deliver a great building that the community can be proud of.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Corey and then Amy.
Hi. Of the remaining trade packages that are favorable or maybe still in consideration that are going to wait and see what happens next week or two, how long are those bids valid for from the March 26th date?
Yeah, we, in our bid documents, we request them to hold for 60 days,
Okay, so we have 6 more weeks roughly to
calendar days, yep.
make a decision. So we'll hear back from you next week and perhaps early May still.
Could be, yep.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
So I had the great learning experience of being on the best value bidding process and spent a good chunk of last week with Josh and George and Val and Justin. And I just want to say I was very impressed by that process and the thoughtfulness behind it. Also, really working with the contractors to see what ideas that they came up with for cost savings. And I think a number of ideas came from that process. And it made me wish that we had done it with every package, though I know that would be very time consuming. And I just wanted to ask, so we're still looking at the same timeline at this point, or how do you see our timeline being affected?
So I think what I would say to that is, as far as getting construction moving, we are still on our timeline as far as getting in the ground and starting this summer. Depending on how we decide to move forward with rebidding or accepting what we have, it could slide some, but I don't see us waiting a year or something to shift
Yeah,
out.
escalation will start to take, its impact, right, pushing projects further out. But if we hear, for example, strongly from bidders that a 2 or 3 month difference in a phase of the project changes prices significantly, I think it'd be our responsibility to bring that to the district to decide, right? We would never decide that for you or on your behalf. But obviously, if we hear, gosh, if that could be done 30 days later, that would save money, I think we'd all entertain that kind of thing.
Okay, Jenny?
Thanks, Claudia. I just have a couple questions. One is, I'm curious about your bid advertising procedure. Can you explain a little bit about how, do you send it out to several Dodge reporting sites, or do you just send out specific scope invitations to subcontractors that are in your network?
Yeah, good question. So we have multiple Builders Exchange sites that we use. Minneapolis Builders Exchange, Rochester Builders Exchange. We actually, uploaded to La Crosse also, and Mankato, I think was the other one. In addition to that, we have our own internal advertisement site that Knutson uses that goes out to, it's generally the same folks that look at those exchanges. So I think we did a pretty good job. I know we did a great job sending that advertisement out. We also made calls for 2.5 weeks to encourage bidders to bid and tell them about the job, walk through the project with them. So I would say, does that answer your question there as far as advertising?
2 pre-bid meetings.
2 pre-bid, yeah. The district actually puts it on their website as well.
Okay. And then was that exclusive to just Minnesota contractors, or did you go outside of the state?
We just posted for Minnesota, but we did get interest from companies in Iowa and Wisconsin that were asking questions about the job. So it kind of filters out depending on what they're tracking as far as the exchange of what's out there for bid.
And then if you rebid, will you use that same advertising process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. And then my second question was about scopes. Did you send out for each scope supply and install? I know you talked a little bit about this, but all together, or did you separate any of the scopes?
We also, all scopes were supply and install. That is one of the strategies that we've talked about separating to gather more interest and to get more bidders to bid to us.
So if you do a second round, would you separate out the remaining scopes? think?
I think we would look at the breakout on where we got bids from to see if that's worth the separation or not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, question or comment at this time? Oh, yes, Ben.
Thanks. I just had one follow-up question for Dr. Hillman. So the LTFM revenue, that's agnostic to project though, right? That's the per pupil, but isn't.
Correct, yeah, it's not. Val, do you want to talk a little bit about LTFM and how we get those dollars and that they can be used for, they can be used for any project where the purpose of the space remains the same or similar to what it was before the project began?
Sure. So the long-term facility maintenance is $380 per pupil. There's a weighting to that calculation that I won't get into because it doesn't really impact us at this moment. And so it's about 1.3 or 1.4 million annually that we bring in. And then the district has a 10-year plan that the board approves, which can be changed. But we have those dollars and they can be used for a wide variety of projects that are meant to, maintain and update the building in its current form. We can't add new square footage, we can't, things like that, but anything that's, repair, replace is eligible. Does that help?
It does. Yeah, I would presume kind of the remodel portion of the high school would be eligible for, depending on.
Yep,
Yeah.
there's a large portion, more than we have access to, that would be qualify
sure.
for those dollars.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And typically in the past, we braided those funds together to make the project go further. In this case, we would use it to maintain what we had presented.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much for your presentation and bringing us up to speed. Board members, we have a motion on the floor, and so I will take a vote, seeing that there's no more discussion on this item. All those in favor of approving the 4 trade packages as presented in our memorandum, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, our next item is items for discussion and reports. And we have our financial forecast follow-up. This is potential budget restorations. Superintendent Hillman and Director of Finance Val Murderstorff will propose budget restorations and administrative restructuring for the 26-27 school year. This proposal will be an item for individual action at our next regular board meeting, April 13th.
So I'm going to start off and then have Val weigh in, and then Caleb Davidson, our current Assistant Director for Special Services and our new Director of Student Services, is here to talk about the potential restructuring in that area as well. So as we look to the next year and we look at some significant leadership transition in this district, we know that we likely cannot continue in the format that we have done this year. So as we weighed what kinds of restorations to propose to the board, we used that as our backdrop. We also know that we finished in a stronger financial position than we had anticipated, so that's something that we took into consideration. And as well, just really thinking through how can we propose position restorations that have an opportunity to have a cascading and positive impact on the incoming administration and throughout the school district. So you will see the first 2 restorations that we are proposing have to do with positions that were reduced in the district office last year. And so board members are very familiar with the approach that we have taken to school administration and district administration over time. I have said time and again, we need as much administration as we need, not 1 penny more, not 1 penny less. We did take a pretty significant reduction last year in an effort to really prioritize maintaining school programs. And so by reducing the Director of Human Resources position from 1.0 to 0.6, as you recall, Director of HR Molly Wieselman retired and then came back as an annuitant at a lower FTE. Hope Langston had retired and we did not refill that position. And as you know, I have been supporting both of those departments. We have been able to make that work this year because of the institutional knowledge that we have had across the district. So Molly and I have worked together for 17 years, and I could hand off she could hand the HR issues off to me when she would leave on Wednesday. I could help support those through Friday and hand them back to her on Monday. We can finish each other's sentences. We worked together for so long, and we know that just moving ahead, having both of us leaving at the end of the year, a organization has 650 employees. Most organizations that size would have a full-time director of human resources. So for the sake of the new superintendent, for the other folks within the system, to be able to have that full-time HR director, we think is important. Additionally, we know that instructional services, it is not reasonable to have a new superintendent also oversee instructional services. That department is also going to lose an additional FTE at the end of this year. The position that Carrie Duba held was grant funded. Right now, that position, when Carrie left us for Duluth in January, Shane Beyer and Hope Langston have been sharing that position through the end of the year, but that position sunsets. It was a grant-funded position that is done at the end of the year. And we know when we take a look at our spending on district and school administration compared to peer-sized districts and the state average, we were already spending a significant amount less per pupil. And to be able to support the programming and the curriculum cycles and the professional development, all the things that are really important to an organization, we don't have the resources to be able to support new leadership next year. And so by restoring these positions, we believe that we put my successor and the system in the best place to be able to respond and support. Right, those district level administrative positions have a cascading support mechanism where they are helping building level leaders, they are helping classrooms, and they're really felt throughout the system. We also, in here, you'll see that we are also suggesting, recommending adding a 1.0 FTE social studies teacher at the middle school. This is an FTE that a few months ago, we would have likely recommended as an additional to the contingency fund, right? And the contingency fund is something that can be used on an annual basis to respond to class size needs. It's much more flexible. 2 rounds ago of budget reductions, the middle school social studies department came forth and said with the current social studies standards, they felt when a staff member retired that the one remaining staff member could cover the 8th grade social studies standards by going to an every other day system. The new social studies standards are being implemented next year, and the new standards do not lend themselves to that same kind of every other day approach. So we would have likely recommended that that be an additional FTE for contingency, which could be distributed throughout the system. But our hand is pretty forced here in terms of we have to have that social studies teacher for next year to be able to meet those standard requirements. We also know that the high school, so we've got a little something there for the middle school. We also know that the high school really is wanting additional support. They reduced a counselor and they reduced an assistant principal. That assistant principal was replaced with a part-time dean this year. And then, mid-year, we restructured that so that dean of students was full-time for the second semester. And what we know with that is that there has not been enough support for the high school staff by not having the assistant principal position. And so, as you know, Mr. Dibble is stepping down at the end of this year, and we are recommending that Shane Beyer return as an interim principal for 26-27, at least 26-27. And in order to make that work in terms of being able to restore some time of the assistant principal, Mr. Beyer is willing to have a contract that is for fewer days than what you would typically see the high school principal have in order to be able to have the assistant principal position restored at a fewer number of days than what the assistant principal position would typically have. To be clear, the existing assistant principal position would remain exactly the same. So that is a way that through stewardship, we're able to try to accomplish both of those things and be able to provide the support that we need. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. I'm going to ask Val if she has any reflections on this section, and then we'll pause and take any questions from the board on this. Before I pass it off to Val too, we have an interest in trying to get, specifically the HR director position and the instructional services position posted should the board choose to move ahead with this. Our initial target was to ask the board to approve this next week because of we just happen to have this 2 meetings within 1 week of each other. But I also understand that it very well would be wise for us to wait to have you approve it until the 27th, so of the second board meeting in April. So while the initial recommendation was it'd be good if we could have this approved next week, we understand we may need a little bit more time. I just want you to know we're not going to force you to vote on this next week if you need some more time to think through it. We just want to we do believe we'll get really great candidates, even if we post those at the end of April. The middle school social studies position, we do know that that is a pool with so many other districts cutting. We know that that's a pool that we do believe will also, even at that late April timeframe, would get really great candidates. So we will pause for a moment and ask Val to share any reflections she has as she did the costing work for this, and if board members have questions on this, we'd be happy to take those.
I think you did a great job summarizing. These are always challenging conversations because we want to be fiscally responsible, but we also have a lot of work that we need to get done and make sure that we're supporting the buildings the best that we can. And so we did go through, just so everyone knows, several iterations of what this could look like, what's the best way to go through this. And really, we ultimately came back to these recommendations. So, but there's a lot on this page, and I'm happy to answer any questions specifically about the costing or any other aspects of the recommendation.
I just want to add, I think that's an important part. We spent several weeks looking at different configurations. So we considered some shared positions. You know, in the past, we've done that to save some money. And we just couldn't find the right combination that didn't depend on having the exact right person in that role to be able to deliver. So, you know, we looked at a variety of different combinations and just felt that from a systems perspective, yes, some of those combinations could work if you had the exact right person. And then understanding that it would be very difficult to have the exact right person in those roles. So having them be more, rather than being combined positions, the singular positions that they had been in the past, for the past several years. Both of these positions at some point or another have had some combinations in the past, but feeling this was the best and the most return on the investment moving ahead.
Board members, I'm going to open the floor now if you have a question or comment on this item. Okay, Amy, anybody else? Okay.
I just want to have you explain once again about the instructional services. So how many people are in that department now? And you said Carrie left, Hope left. You had Hope and Shane fill in. But
Yep, I'll walk
explain it a
through-
little bit more.
I'll walk through the structure. So I'll walk through what the structure was last year, and then I'll compare it to this year. So in 25-26, 24-25, Hope was the Director of Instructional Services. Carrie Duba, grant funded. Shane Byer, or excuse me, not Shane Byer. Carrie Duba was grant funded. Michelle Bauer, full-time Instructional Services Support Specialist. Alicia Clary, full-time Instructional Services Support Specialist. Ray Coudray, full-time Instructional Systems Support Specialist. And then that department had a shared administrative assistant between technology and instructional services. This year, no director position. I oversaw that team, so full FTE reduction there. Carrie Duba's position 1.0, grant funded, continued all the way through this year. She worked about half the year, and then as some people know, she moved to Duluth and had an opportunity to take a job closer to home, and so she left mid-year, and we've had 2 people sharing that position this year. Michelle Bauer in the exact same position she was last year. Alicia Clary in the exact same position she was last year. Ray Coudray, as you recall, he also retired and came back at halftime. So you have another half-time less person in that department. And the administrative assistant's job description was changed a bit to include the district assessment coordination position. And so still serving both technology and instructional services on some administrative support structures, but also has some additional responsibility for district assessment services. And if you recall, we actually even used to, even longer ago, we actually had a director of assessment services as well. So that department has been reduced over the past several years.
Is Ray returning next year?
Yeah, the plan right now would be to have the 2.5 instructional services support specialist return next year, yes.
So basically, we were at 5, and without any change, we'd be down to 2.5.
Roughly, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
I have, my first question is regarding the first two, the Human Resources Director and the full-time Director of Instructional Services. What would the duties be? Because it says duties redistributed. What were those duties that were redistributed? Can you just list off just
Sure.
a few that come to mind, or?
Yep. So I think a couple of the key parts were that some of the duties would have been redistributed all of the duties were distributed on the days when the HR director is not on campus. So obviously the 6/10 position, Molly is here 3 days a week. And so, for example, the kinds of things that I would support on the other days would be background check pieces. So if a background check comes back that is, does not meet the district standards, I would help facilitate bringing that to closure. Any kind of investigation, that would be something that we would have supported. I took a larger role in the negotiations, going back to being the lead negotiator where the HR director had been the lead negotiator in the past. So Molly continued to do the same roles that she had, but for lesser time, right? So when she was not here, between Val and myself and other people in the department, we kept those pieces moving to the best of our ability. Part of that is that, again, the institutional knowledge that we had, we were able to do that without, it took time, right? But we didn't need any additional specialized knowledge or skills because we've worked together so long that we knew that. So that's an example for the HR. Is that helpful?
Yes, and then just to clarify, both of these positions were reduced. So we were operating this entire school year with only the 0.6 FTE for human resources, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, and then we were also operating this so far, almost entire school year of the no full-time Director of Instructional Services.
That is correct.
And what were your complaints or issues that you saw or ran into by not having the full-time in either position for this school year?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, there's two parts. There's both the pieces around the concerns that would have been had for this school year, and then there's also projecting forward, right, in terms of to next year. So from we look at a this year perspective, I think we were able to swim pretty fast and keep right at the water, right? I don't think we had, I would say, responsiveness on the HR side is always something, but they did a great job of responding. People just didn't see the paddling underneath the water to be able to make that happen, right? With all the people going above and beyond what they needed to do to make sure that all those systems kept running. Not gonna say I got a ton of complaints, right? But what I do know is because people understood the circumstance and they were flexible and understood that there were various ways we'd have to respond. That going forward next year, I personally just don't see how that can continue without having a new leader who has been here and understands I was the director of HR at one time, right? So I had that background. On the instructional services side, again, I think that we have done a good job of keeping the trains running. The projects that we've had going have continued. That's really due to Hope Langston's work and the systems that she put in place. Where we have struggled is specifically on the data side, right? Hope was such a skilled person with data, and she would be able to dedicate some of her time to that. We've been able to do the best that we can. Carrie did a lot of good work with it. Hope coming back at 0.25 of that instructional services support position in the spring has been helpful, but we just don't have the bandwidth that we need to be able to support the curriculum and review instructional cycles, to be able to make sure that there's really quality oversight, moving ahead, the support from a full-time director. What I will tell you is that I just know, because Hope and I had regular discussions, that there were many kinds of instructional questions that Hope would have gotten that people aren't giving to me, right? And it's not because they don't have faith I can't help them, it's that they understand that we are stretched and don't have the ability to respond in that way. So a district the size of 3,700 students, roughly 350 or so teachers, we were able to make it work, and we were able to make it work this year. I will say not at the level that we typically would expect, right? But we were able to make it work because we have people who have been here long enough to know. And with those players leaving next year, many of them leaving, we just don't believe that the people replacing us, would be able to do that right away. Maybe down the line they can. We just want to set the new superintendent and the new administration up for success, and we think these are some ways to do it.
And then regarding the Assistant Director of Special Services ad request,
Yep.
similar question, can you just list off some of the duties for that position as well?
So if we could, can we pause on that for a second? So I'm going to have Caleb come up and give the description of this special services reorg. I just wanted to pause here to talk about those first ones. And then Caleb will talk about what those duties would be. And then questions could be at that time if that's okay.
Thank you.
Ben?
So just to kind of reiterate, I think what I heard, Dr. Hillman, was that you weren't doing 2.6 FTE worth of work. Maybe you were, but but I mean, in terms
Nope.
of just maintenance of effort versus sort of new effort, when you look at kind of what is probably needed
sure.
in terms of kind of where you feel like we've got gaps going, moving into the future.
We did the best we could to perform 2.4 FTE worth of work.
That's yeah, and I think, you know, we recognized that as we went through these kind of budget reduction cycles over the last few years, really, that this day was probably going to come, right? You know, you had a unique team, people that have been here for a long time. You know, as you said, we were able to kind of hold off some of the reductions in the classroom because of that institutional knowledge. Obviously, we're kind of at a significant pivot point within the district in terms of just, right, you taking new opportunities and some retirements and things like that. So just to ask the question, though, in terms of the instructional services, like what, you know, you talked about sort of swimming, right? Like what moves us ahead, or sort of what new activities do you see happening by adding that role back that weren't happening just because we're kind of maintenance of effort?
Yeah, I think that what it will be is more real-time, in-time support for the system support specialists and the systems that they support. The team has been doing an excellent job. I want to be really clear. They have done a very good job with the limited resources, continuing the important work of the implementation of the READ Act, by way of example, implementing or reviewing new curricula, right, for secondary math, in which we believe will revolutionize the way that children learn math and create more mathematically literate thinkers and problem solvers. That takes effort, right? And Ray's been doing a great job with that. You know, the continued effort to be able to implement English language arts curriculum, and again, keeping that curriculum review cycle going. One of the things that we know is that making sure that we can keep that going. We had gone too long without having a solid system for that in place. And it was no one's fault. It was just the culture of the district and the way that we had worked through. But we recognize that we have to respond to new expectations, new standards, and to be able to have people who are helping lead that and the positional authority of a director of instructional services to be able to help keep those things moving forward. And I think also the data support, right? Well, when we post this role, that job description that we have had includes quite a bit around data support. So we'd be looking for someone who also has that ability to support that real-time data that we know is really important to helping make sure that grade level teams and departments have the information that they need to make the instructional changes to support students and preparing them for lifelong success.
Right. So we could say that that's sort of a core function of what we do relative to the curriculum. Is it working? If we're not seeing the change in the data that we want to see, sort of what interventions might we need to make, and essentially in real time. So it's.
And again, I want to be very clear. The people who have been on the staff, everyone has stepped up, right, from every corner of the district. It is just one of those things that, in the circumstances that we're in, I personally don't see a way that you're setting up a new leadership team and thus an entire district for success by trying to. Frankly, if the people who are retiring and leaving this year were staying here, we would very likely continue with this next year, right? We'd very likely continue it, and we just don't see how that can happen given the changes. Again, like you said, retirements and new opportunities, et cetera.
And then briefly, two other questions. One was just kind of the reduction of the assistant and high school principal. I mean, you're kind of reducing by 30 or 40 days in some of those instances. Impact because of that, just in terms of?
Yeah, so of course, you know, I think that anytime you reduce the number of days, certainly that has an impact. And as we've worked through that, we believe that this is a way that we can actually relieve some of the administrative burden from the two building administrators there by having someone else who can do the evaluation work and some of the other tasks that only an assistant principal could do. Again, we'd propose that for the 26-27 school year to provide as much stability as we can. And then, of course, the leadership team and the board can take a look at that a year from now. But again, we'd prefer not to have to reduce those days, but in our commitment to stewardship, saying we probably can't just add something. We have to figure out how we also reduce in some areas. And as over spring break, Mr. Byer agreed to come back as the interim principal. This was one of the things that we discussed as a way to be able to provide the entire building the support that they need.
And last question, just for Val, I put in here that's 13.4% at the end of 27-28. What was it before? What we were projecting, like 14 and a half?
That's a great question. I want to say 14 and a half, but I can go look that up in my previous model. I don't have that right off the top of my head.
No worries. Thanks.
And I want to also just say before we transition to having Caleb come talk about the special service, this doesn't mean these are proposals that we look at for right now. As you know, when we look at numbers over the summer, and we will try to work within the existing FTE that we have to respond to other situations, other class size situations, et cetera. And at the end of the day, we have come to you before in August and asked you for additional support where it might be needed. And what we think the district is going to need to do in declining enrollment is we've been blessed for some time to be able to make some of those decisions around number of sections, et cetera. Earlier in the year, when I first arrived in Northfield, we wouldn't make decisions about those sections when they were close until early August. And so unfortunately, we may have to look at some of those decisions being later summer when we sort out who is coming back, right? Sometimes there's enough students who leave at one grade level at one building that we could move an FTE from one building to the other to address another hotspot. We still have one contingency FTE in the budget, so that can be used to address those pieces. So I want to be really clear that, you know, we likely would have had a contingency FTE had we not had the social studies piece, but there are other options to address other concerns that we know are coming up throughout the district as we move forward. These are things that we would need to get hired and ready to go for next year at this time.
Corey, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a few. Thanks, Claudia. Generally speaking, I support the decisions. Obviously, the district needs to manage the district, so I appreciate that leadership is able to advocate for the day-to-day business, but as a board, we have to look at the financial ramifications of those. So appreciate the work that's been done the last couple of weeks to figure out a plan that might work within the scope of our budget and kind of the question marks moving forward. That said, I have a few questions, mostly for Val, but maybe Matt as well. So related to the 13.4% projection for fiscal year 27-28, is that inclusive of any expected increase for the new superintendent contract, or is that based on the existing contract?
No, that does not include any increase for that. I took the financial forecast from January and updated it specifically for those so that I was doing apples to apples. And it was 15% to answer Ben's question.
So our budget's at about 68 million right now, so every percentage point is about $680,000.
Yes.
Okay, so
roughly.
even with an expected increase to the superintendent, still a modest increase to the effect here, but just wanted to see if it was accounted for here.
Yep.
And similarly with the principal suggestion at the high school, I'm assuming that's the 2-year outlook is inclusive of next year's arrangement. If we agree to that, that Shane would be in that position. I know it's year to year probably, but that the same number would carry over 2 years out. It wouldn't be back to full-time in terms of how it impacts your projection.
I believe that's correct because I think I put it in as a multi-year, but I can triple check that real
Okay,
quick.
thank you. Concerning the vacant instructional services position, it was reported that this year we saved $190,000 in that position. I see that you've asked for about a $50,000 increase on the position. Is that just what market rate is at, and maybe the position was under market, or I'm trying to see the $50,000 increase
The
on that.
190,000 wasn't a full reduction. We saved about 50,000 of that reduction to add some mentor time. There were a few other components in that restructure. It helped support the that kind of restructuring for the administrative assistant to have some of that data support. So there was about 50,000 that was not reduced to help kind of restructure that.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yep.
And then I think the last one, because I was giving others opportunities, I had a pretty big list here. In the narrative, it says that continued advocacy for funding, quote, There will be continued advocacy for funding, quote, while facing new challenges we had not anticipated. Can you elaborate on what those challenges were?
Well, if we could anticipate the challenges, we would have listed them.
Well, the way it was written made it sound like they were past tense.
Yeah, well, fair point. And what I will say is, give you one example. Before we wrote this, the state was only going to cut $250 million from special education funding if the Blue Ribbon Commission didn't find $250 million in savings. Now, the governor's budget has that at $300 million.
Sure.
So that's an example.
I assume they were legislatively driven. so-
correct.
Which we're in the middle of. So fair enough. The way it was written made it sound like perhaps it was the current fiscal year and not
Right, no,
necessarily
and
future.
some of the other pieces,
casting.
we don't know what things like fuel oil and some of those other things, the other pieces that are gonna be an issue.
And I appreciate, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say another example is the summer unemployment aid, right? It's currently funded, but our latest update from MDE a couple weeks ago is that we project they're only going to have about 85% of our funding for next year. So if they don't do anything, I have that projected to continue in the forecast. So that would be a difference as well.
Yeah, totally realize there's a lot of moving parts, but $480,000 is a significant increase and it's easier to maintain. So I appreciate the decisions that were made last year to take advantage of the institutional knowledge to have a 1-year stopgap. But, at that time, it doesn't matter now, I would have felt better to keep those roles and just take the bite then. But we can restore it. That's what's being suggested. So I appreciate, Dr. Hillman, that you mentioned that, we could maybe wait another board meeting. I feel like 1 week for these decisions is somewhat fast. I would like to get more feedback, particularly around special services, but restoring positions is good, right? I don't have a problem with that. It's just the money piece, right? So I'd like to hear what other board members feel about whether the 13th is good or if we should push it off, but we could probably wait till
Yeah, I
after the
think we should
special
wait for
services
that
piece.
till after Caleb talks, yeah.
Can I provide the answer for your last financial question and then go back? The reduction in days for the high school principal, since it was interim, I did as a 1 year. So that would show restoring the high school principal in 27, 28 back to full. But the reduction in days for the assistant principal was an ongoing. That's how it's costed currently. That doesn't mean that's how it has to play out, but that's how the numbers are shaking out.
Best you can do, right?
Yes.
A lot of question marks. Thank you.
And then Amy, did you have a comment? Okay, Jenny.
Okay, sorry, I do have another question that's a non-special services question regarding the assistant principal at the high school and then the reducing high school principal pieces here. I noticed that in this narrative, there were rationale provided for some of the other areas, but this didn't really have much. And so I was wondering if you can just elaborate on the rationale for that. And then also what types of support that the assistant principal would be offering that the dean of students cannot provide?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that, actually, both of those questions I can sum up in the one part of it, which is there are some things that are required, an administrative position, right? Not just having an administrative license. So you could require a dean of students to have an administrative license, but because they're not in a principal or assistant principal position, there are some restrictions on things that they can do. The two biggest areas, Jenny, are related to teacher evaluation in terms of being able to provide that feedback. And so if you think about having 2 people versus 3 people to be able to provide that for 100 or so teaching staff members at the high school, that's an important part until it's probably been 10 years now that we've been required to provide feedback for an evaluation for every tenured member at least once every 3 years. And then every time you have a probationary staff member, the law requires they get 3 evaluations each year. So if you do the math, right, when you have a larger number of probationary people, which I'm not saying we do at the high school right now, but it does limit the ability for that kind of, for being able to provide that feedback through evaluation. Then there are also some limits on what a dean of students can do related to student discipline, specifically related to suspension. So it isn't that we have a lot of suspensions, but in those cases, in the past, you'd have an assistant principal that would be responsible for a couple of grade levels each. So those are just 2 kinds of things that the assistant principal can do that the dean of students cannot. I think another part is the assistant principal role, because it's a true assistant principal role requiring the license, et cetera. also has provided in the past a significant amount of additional support for after-school and weekend supervision of events without additional pay, because that's part of the overall structure of the position. So that's another piece that was, we just didn't feel we could ask the Dean of Students to do that same kind of level of supervision. So those are just a few things I would say are some of the differences.
Okay, and then I'm gonna pull out the same question I did on you before, what kind of complaints or issues did you see or did you hear by, reducing down to the Dean of Students?
I think the things that I've identified are things that I've heard concerns on. Again, everybody has worked really hard. The current Dean of Students has done an excellent job. It's the difference between what the Dean of Students role can do and what the assistant principal role can do. It isn't about people were understanding, right? And at the same time, there's a piece of some things that are delayed or can't be done as a result of not having the position structured in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Comment, question at this time? And then my question is about, you're asking for a return of the HR director and then the full-time director of instructional services. There was a scenario where it could be done by one person, but I understand that you broke it up so that there would be, it's more possible to get two individuals or more likely than it is to get one who can do both. My question just has to do with if that magical person showed up, we would consider or not consider.
So that's a chicken or egg, kind of question. And when Val and I and Molly looked in detail at these scenarios, if you were to do the combined instructional services HR position, when you have a shared position, and we have experience with shared positions in the past, you then tend to need a little bit more technical support. So as we looked at some other scenarios, the scenarios where that directorship could be shared, there would have been proposed some additional positions within the finance or the HR department specifically to be able to account for some of those day-to-day things that would need to happen. And so when we've had shared positions in the past, which we've done several over the years, and there's a reason we don't have as many of them anymore, because that person tends to always be in the space where the other entity needs them, if that makes sense. And so we went through a number of iterations of several different kinds of consolidation of duties. And in order to do that, we needed to add more people, right, to the district office staff to be able to make sure that, again, our goal is to have just as much administrative and infrastructure as we need. And we felt we were getting beyond that, and we came back to just restoring these positions seemed to be the most efficient in the way that they had been structured before.
And these are only district positions, district office positions. In other words, the middle school social studies person is different.
Yep, and the high school.
In the high school. Was there any place to restore any positions at the elementary level? I'm thinking about behavior coach, which I believe that was grant funded over the COVID years.
We still have the behavior coach as it has existed for some time. What you might be thinking about is that Greenville Park had a second behavior coach for a period of time. And that was, I believe, if I'm remembering, I think they used compensatory funding to fund that. So then there were some changes in that required some restructuring there. So we used that. I think that was actually the 2022 budget reductions where the shift was from using compensatory for that position to supporting other positions that didn't need to be reduced. So each elementary school still has a behavior coach. And we also know, as you know, you see an enrollment report every month, right? We have a number of grade levels that compared to historical are larger than what we would like. And that's some of the pressure that we have with declining enrollment. Students don't all disappear from one grade level. That's the challenge that we have.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Right, then.
So I'd like to have Caleb come up and talk a little bit about the special services restructuring. To be clear here, there's no net add to the budget. This is looking at how can we leverage the existing resources that we have to respond to concerns and efficiencies that we're looking to support in special services. So Caleb is just going to outline very briefly the changes and the rationale for the changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the proposal, it decreases an FTE, or early childhood special education coordinator. It decreases a school psychologist FTE. With that reduction, it adds 25 extra duty days between the remaining school psychologists, and then it adds an additional assistant director of special services at a reduced adjusted market rate. And then the primary rationale behind this is despite declining enrollment in Northfield, we actually have had increasing child count for special education. It's increased as much as 100 students in the past 5 or 6 years. In our modeling, that is showing it's probably possibly going to be plateauing, but we also are unsure with the reduction in birth rate. Adding to that with early childhood, we're seeing that decline in birth rate in Rice County, hence our declining numbers of students in our early childhood requiring maybe less administrative oversight. So the ideal is kind of shifting that administrative oversight to an assistant director position, having 2 assistant directors to provide more site-based administration and support within our buildings from those positions. And then the final piece is increased legal complexity with due process and IEPs. Every IEP is required to have an LEA representative, local education agent representative. Those are often supported as school psychologists in our district. However, best practice and due to increased legal complexity between requests for mediation and conciliation conferencing has led us to need to have more licensed special ed administrators at IEP meetings and available for those processes to discuss with teams and with parents.
And again, what I want to commend here is that I think special services, as we know, we have a fairly significant special education cross-subsidy, around a little more than $4 million of general funding that we use to pay for what I would consider to be morally imperative, yet not reimbursed services for students with disabilities. We want to be thoughtful about any addition to the budget in this area, because remember, when we add to the budget in this area, then we have to have maintenance of effort, which means next year we have to spend exactly that same amount of money plus at least a penny versus the year before. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness in terms of thinking about how do we respond to these things and understanding that it's a change, right? It is a different structure, and when you have change, it's going to create some concerns about how do we do the things that we've done in a different way, but presenting this in a way that is cost neutral. I think the other part that's not necessarily reflected in what you got today is that there's also there was around $50,000 or so savings, if I'm remembering that correct.
Yep, and that 50,000 reduction or savings is going to be invested into teacher professional development, ideally in the summer prior to school, really focusing on supporting behaviors in our federal Setting 3 programming, and then also increase FTE for school or for educational assistants primarily in our center-based classrooms.
So again, some optional training for staff at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And some other pieces to support. So that wasn't necessarily reflected in this list that was a part of our presentation. But again, I appreciate that we have to continue to respond and look at things differently, right? And so as Caleb outlined, trying to do so in a cost neutral way is important. There's other ideas, of course, of how you could address that. And Caleb, as the incoming Director of Student Services, is open to those kinds of pieces of feedback. And as we know, we're a continuous improvement district. So when we make changes, just like we shared with you tonight, last year we made some changes to administrative levels that we're able to work for a period of time. And now we're going to come back and look at something different. So if what is proposed is, I'm confident it will work well, but if tweaks need to be made, those can be done as well. We'd be happy to have any questions for Caleb.
Okay, Amy.
Caleb, first I want to welcome you as the Director of Special Services, and thank you for taking on that position. And it seems like you're kind of jumping right into the fire with this one.
Yep.
There's been a little kerfuffle in my email box today from all of the.
Yeah, so we have passionate, dedicated educators in the district who care about students and the job they do, and I that's part of the reason why I want to be nowhere else but Northfield. So I had a listening session this morning with early childhood team to kind of hear about some of their concerns with this specific proposal, and then I have listening sessions scheduled at all 3 elementaries this week to hear specific concerns with this proposal. With how it rolled out, I don't think we got enough information ahead of time to teams to really understand the full scope of how this model would look in reality. So I'm hopeful that I can answer more questions from both the board and our teams throughout this next couple weeks as the board prepares making a final decision on this proposed model.
I'm really glad that you're talking to all of our people who have their boots on the ground, who are
Absolutely.
doing all the work and getting input from them and ideas from them, because we've learned time over time on the board that some of the best ideas come up from people who are doing the work. So
Absolutely.
I look forward to hearing your updates at a
Yes, I'll be
future
here
meeting.
next week to provide any updates or answer additional questions you have other than what you have still tonight.
Excellent. Okay, Ben?
Yeah, let me. Congrats, Caleb.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thanks.
I'll piggyback off what Amy asked. So, give us a little more color in terms of if it didn't get communicated quite
Yeah.
right, like what that looks like, and then two, what are some of the concerns that you're hearing from
Yeah.
kind of in response to that? Some specific examples would be
Yes,
good.
absolutely. Special services runs a really lean team, and people think special services, they think special education, and it also includes multilingual supports, ADSYS supports, title services, nursing services, county mental health supports, Setting 4 partnerships, Minnesota Academy partnerships. I'm missing several, but it's a really broad spectrum. So when people, I think, heard another assistant director, they thought another district office position. However, this model would actually be taking the 2 assistant director positions and making them more boots on the ground positions. They would not office out of the district office. They'd have offices in buildings and really have assigned days and time within the buildings that they're supervising to have greater access for educators and students to our assistant directors, especially for these IEP meetings and this behavior problem solving and the IEP planning processes.
And what were some of the concerns then? I mean, was it that?
Yeah, I think it was that, and then I think there's concern with we've had the model of the coordinator or a lead teacher at the early childhood for a long time, and I think there's concerns around that administrative oversight not being there daily and present, which is definitely a significant change for that team. So in discussions with that team today, we kind of discussed their major concerns with that, and if the model progresses, how we would support some of the concerns with like behavior response and tracking, our referrals and evaluations through the early childhood side of things.
Okay. And then I saw in one of the bullet points, I think the second one was kind of the reduction in a school psychologist
Yes.
role and then kind of spreading that across the other.
Yeah, Northfield, we've been really lucky to have a building psychologist in each building, and it's a model we've ran in Northfield for several years, and it's a pretty unique model to Northfield. To have a psych per building. And looking at our 5-year average of evaluations, we really see specific elementaries, depending on their child count, with not quite a need for a full FTE there. And every year we run our models for staffing, and we add FTE or reduce FTE per building based on different areas. And we were looking at a continued need for one building in particular for possibly a slightly reduced FTE for a psychologist just because of the need. And when looking at the market and the need and how valuable psychologists are, there's no way that we can go out and post and hire a 0.6 or a 0.8 psychologist. So hence restructuring the position to have 2 to 2.4 FTE psychologists support 2 buildings, and then that is having an elementary specific assistant director overseeing that. And with that elementary assistant director really supporting the admin designee or the IEP meetings for a lot of our center-based and Setting 3 IEPs, accounting for upwards of 30% of the IEP meetings at the elementary level.
So tell me what the current psychologist model is and what the future model would be.
Yeah,
under this
right now we
agreement.
have 6 psychologists spread out throughout the district. We have 1 at each elementary, 1 at the middle school, 1 shared between the high school and ALC, and 1 at the early childhood. And with this new model, again, we did a 5-year study looking at evaluations, looking at re-evaluations, a process called non-evaluation. And it's not set in stone. I still want to have thoughtful conversations, especially with our school psychologist team, before we settle on a final model. However, we've been looking at some possible models that could look like, maintaining a shared psychologist at the ALC high school, middle school shared with like St. Dom's, and then the remaining 3 shared between the 3 elementaries and the early childhood center. With the lowest need at Spring Creek, pending the historic eval data. With that, knowing that new assistant director position would most likely office out of that building then.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Corey?
Hey Caleb, just one follow-up question.
Yeah.
You've alluded to it a few times. Just want to hear a little bit more about the IEP means. You had mentioned that there's been obviously a significant increase over the years. Hopefully we're plateauing. It takes the psychologist away from student services. You mentioned 30%. I just want to dive into a little bit more.
Yeah.
How much time will this free up for the remaining school psychologists to spend more time with the students rather than in the administrative role with the IEP? I realize it's probably hard to
Yeah, it's difficult.
quantify,
It's
but
difficult to account with the model shift. What I can tell you with the increased legal complexities of IEP meetings, of conciliation requests and mediation requests, are they're very timely and they're very costly processes. And I think we in special education administration really try to take on the brunt of those processes, and most often time buildings aren't seeing those processes play out because they're very complex and they take a lot of time. So that in itself, I'd hope that we can have more special education administrators at IEP meetings to proactively reduce some of those needs for leading to conciliation or mediation.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Amy?
I am hoping you can speak a little bit on the role of the psychologists and what they actually do.
Yeah.
And I'm also wondering, do they actually provide some sort of therapy that we can charge back to people's insurance, or are they strictly school employees?
I think part of the reason why this proposal is so difficult for many people is because our school psychologists are amazing and they wear a lot of hats. A primary role of our school psychologist is evaluating and reevaluating students to qualify for special education services. But they also often lead MTSS processes, child find processes in their building. They oftentimes support behavior response. They might even just get their boots on the ground and support lunchroom duty or on a playground. And I think there's dozens of other duties that I can't fully speak to because each building is so different and has their nuances. But the primary duty of a school psychologist is that evaluating and student support. And for the most part, while some of our school psychologists might be doing like, small groups with students, we don't have really any billing or, school psychologists aren't providing really direct services except for the evaluation piece. For the SEL or the behavioral health side of things, we primarily have our school social workers providing those services.
Jenny, did you have a question?
Thanks, Claudia. I just have one question, which I had previously started, and now I'll finish. For the Assistant Director of Special Services, it was mentioned that their duty is site-based support, but I don't know what that means or what that looks like.
Yeah.
So I need a lot more detail. So what would the
Yeah.
duties, the actual day-to-day or daily duties be?
So aside from our early childhood coordinator, who's directly at Early Childhood Center, Sarah Pratt, the director, and I split all other buildings and duties. So when you oversee 3-4 duties and multiple programs, it's difficult to be in your buildings as often as you would like. Site-based distributes the locations and supports more equally among those 3 administrators. So instead of one administrator having 1 building or one administrator having 4 buildings, this new model would make it so, one assistant director would oversee early childhood and maybe one of our secondary buildings. And then the elementary assistant director would oversee those 3 elementary buildings. And then the director position would have that district oversight and then would still oversee probably a building and some other programming as well.
So when you say oversee, what does that include?
Yeah, sorry. Attending IEP meetings as needed, supporting the supervision and evaluation of special education teachers, problem-solving students and behaviors, consulting with legal complexities with building and general education administrators, staff planning. Those are a few of the duties, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
Yep.
then I have just a general question, if that's okay. So maybe more for Dr. Hillman. So this whole narrative is titled Restorations. And so with that in mind, and I know Claudia already touched on this, but I was just wondering if it was put out onto the table to hire another or more licensed elementary school teachers, and if it was put out on the table, what was the reasoning that it was not included in this restoration?
So we did not specifically put new elementary FT on the table. partially because we would address that through contingency. So we've got the 1 FTE in contingency. We used to have 3 FTE in contingency. What had been on the table would have been to add an additional contingency and then determine that we needed to prioritize the middle school social studies position first. So that is the reason for what you have here today. And when you look at we hear about, there's lots of different ways to support people, right? And leadership matters. And so ensuring that we have quality leaders who are able to respond and support, for example, the special services, we know there's been an increased need for special education administration to respond directly at a school site. And so that can be one way of support. We also know that our numbers tend to be a little bit volatile yet at this point of the year. You know, who do we have coming in? Who do we have going out? So some of those other decisions about class size at the elementary or at the secondary level, because we have some questions at the secondary level too, those we have time yet to make, right? If there's additional things that would be needed and if the board were to choose to prioritize that. At this point, what we were looking at is, from the teaching perspective, that middle school social studies position was what needed to be restored. And again, I want to come back to that if all things were equal, we likely wouldn't be recommending the other administrative restorations that we have suggested. But because of the most significant change in our leadership team in the 17 years that I've been here, due to retirements and again, some other opportunities, needing to make sure that, you know, we are supporting the new superintendent and the new other administrators with this level of collegial leadership to have this cascading impact on elementary schools and on secondary schools, the kind of support that can make or break a difference. We know that there will be some additional support at the elementary level. I don't see a way where that's not going to happen. We have the 1 contingency FTE in the budget. There could be additional down the line if it is needed. These are the things that we're looking at trying to post at this point in the year. So when we looked at how much money we felt we could do without accelerating the budget reduction process again, this is where we land. And we understand reasonable people can have different perspectives on, you know, what should be in a list of restorations. Those are what we felt for our job is to look at the overall health of the system. And this is what we felt at this time was the most important piece.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you, Caleb. Okay, so we are going to take a short recess at this point so that we can move into item B, which is our superintendent search, and let Dr. Hillman move on with his evening. So I'm gonna call for a 5-minute recess. I make a motion for a 5-minute recess. Is there a second?
Second.
Corey? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, we will adjourn for 5 minutes, back at 6:38. Review and discuss Northfield Public Survey Report. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me back. I'm looking forward to going over the next steps of the superintendent search. So the first item, as you mentioned, is that we're going to talk about the public input survey results. I'm going to see if I can screen share. Okay, can you all see the public survey report now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so here's an overview of the public survey report. So it opened on March 10th. It was only open for a brief 12 days. So it was closed right away on March 22nd. And there were a total of 251 people who completed the survey. And then I'm going to go through some of those results here. So the first part of it, the very first question was a self-identifier, and then we have the questions. I'll give you an overview of the totals, the total results, and then we have some breakdown by these self-identifier groups as well. So 53% of the respondents were parents and guardians, 27% were staff, just under 9% were community members, under 6% were students. You had 2.4% that responded other, and of those, it was a former board member. I believe some of them were students because they had interesting descriptors of their title, so I'm going to assume they were students, but I can't confirm that. And then I think there was some other former staff members. And then 1.6 were business owners, 1.2 consider themselves a district partner, and nobody selected agriculture for the survey. So out of all of those who responded, the areas of expertise that rose to the top were budget and finance, collaborative leadership, strategic planning, curriculum development and evaluation, personnel management, and educational equity. For previous experience, 46%, almost 47% responded that yes, it was important that they have previous experience as a superintendent, while 53% of the respondents selected no. For specialized skills, this is one that is an apples to apples question with what the board took during their hiring criteria survey. And so we'll take a look at how they compare with these results coming up. So leads with honesty and in an ethical manner with the school board staff, students, parents, and community, experience in school finance, visible and accessible, somebody who develops trust and works collaboratively, somebody who demonstrates clear, confident, and adaptable communication skills, and develops and directs an effective leadership team. For personal characteristics, they want somebody who is an effective communicator, somebody who's ethical, somebody who's transparent, a problem solver, personable, and consistent. So then we have that breakdown. So you can see here, it has the total numbers of respondents. So you can see what that looks like. And then for the previous experience, you can see the breakdown here by who selected what. So for the other, 100% of them said no, that it was not important. If you look at staff, 56% of them are looking for somebody with experience, 43% said it was not as important. Your community members think it's very important. So 84% of those, again, there were 22, so 84% of them said that it was important, and about 16% said that it was not. I'm not going to go through all of the breakdown. You have this information in front of you, but so you can take a look at all of the different breakdown in the responses. So you can see the different areas of expertise, what led to the top for each between parents and guardians and staff members, and then all of your different breakdowns. For the top 6 personal characteristics, the same thing. And then the next page has that comparison that I'm talking about. So the top section is the leadership profile. Again, that's what is listed on the vacancy brochure, and that was developed from the hiring criteria survey that you board members took. And so you can see the results of that on the left-hand side in this middle section here, with the results of the total public input on the right side. So of the top 6 highest categories for the school board that the school board selected, you can see 5 of those 6 were identified by the school, or by the public, between staff and community, students, and so on and so forth. So you can see that where that strong alignment is. So we can see that you're definitely in touch with what everybody seems to be looking for in the next superintendent. The following areas of expertise also rose to the top, so budget and finance and collaborative leadership. The board felt very strongly that the next superintendent have previous experience. So you had said 71% of you had wanted experience, and 29 said it wasn't as important. So you can see you are looking for a little bit more with experience as opposed to what your public input survey said. And then this is kind of that breakdown of that apples to apples question, the specialized skills. So breakdown by parents and guardians, you can see you had 5 of the 6 were the same. With staff members, again, the same thing. 5 of the 6 were the same. They also identified somebody who is a visionary and has a creative approach to problem solving. Your parents and guardians want somebody who will develop trust and work collaboratively with diverse groups and communities. That one we touched on earlier. You can see with your community members, you had 5 of the top 6. Again, students, they had 4 of the top 6. Your other category only had 1 that was the same. Again, that was 6 individuals. And then your business owners, you had 2. Again, there were 4 of those, and then district partners, you had 4 of the top 6 in alignment with them. Okay, so that's the end of like the quantitative data that we just pulled together. And then there were 4 open-ended questions. Again, these open-ended questions of the entire survey, none of them are required. So anybody can just skip questions and only answer the certain questions that they want to answer. So they could just fill out these open-ended questions, or they could just take all of the front end, select the top, identify the top personal characteristics that they're looking for and hit submit, and then they'd be included. So of the 251, an average of 175 people responded to these questions. So there's 4 questions that we asked. Again, they were there's no character limit, so they can be as candid as they want, and it's an anonymous survey. So we asked, what are some of the good things taking place in Northfield Public Schools? What challenges do you see ahead over the next 5 years? What does the new superintendent need to know about the history of the school district and community in order to be successful? And then any additional comments. And so of some of the good things taking place in Northfield Public Schools, there were 70 related responses to Northfield Public Schools. The schools are strengthened by high quality, caring staff and steady leadership, with respondents highlighting a positive, collaborative culture and strong commitment to students. And you can see a bunch of those specific comments that were left about that. So some of those are, there's a lot of goodwill with staff. The staff cares about kids, goes above and beyond. They feel seen by administration. Morale is very high. Top-notch teachers, caring and committed staff, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read through them all, but there were 70 related responses, and here's a sample of those. The next one that was identified was that Northfield Public Schools provides students with a wide range of meaningful academic, extracurricular, arts, career, and support opportunities that help students explore their interests, develop their talents, and prepare for future success. And there were 69 related responses to that. And again, you can see a good sample of those, the different areas that were identified under that topic. The next one had 44 related responses around the topic of Northfield Public Schools benefits from strong community support and engagement with families, voters, local organizations, and public partners actively investing in and working alongside the district to support its schools and students. And there were 44 related responses to that, and you can see a sample of those down below. There were 41 responses to the theme of Northfield Public Schools is recognized for strong academics, high expectations, and quality teaching and learning with solid curriculum, student growth, and preparation for future success. And then you can see some of those 41 responses below that. And the last theme that was identified was Northfield Public Schools is marked by a welcoming, inclusive, and caring culture where students feel respected, supported, and connected to their schools. And you can see some of those 38 responses below that. The next question was, what challenges do you see for the district over the next 5 years? There were 102 responses around enrollment, declining enrollment. So it says respondents believe a major challenge is the declining enrollment, which is closely tied to housing, population trends, families' decisions about whether to choose the district. The decline creates growing pressure on the district's budget, staffing, and ability to maintain programs, services, and opportunities for students. And there was, again, 102 related responses. Just declining enrollment, just that alone was used 13 times. And then in addition, you can see a lot of the other ones. Decline in enrollment due to the cost of living in Northfield. Declining enrollment. We need to continue to evaluate staffing and programming to meet our changing enrollment. So that is definitely one of the perceived challenges ahead. With that, of course, comes financial stability since so much of finances are tied to enrollment. So the next area that the respondents identified as potential challenges is that financial stability could be a significant challenge for Northfield Public Schools as rising costs, funding uncertainty, and tax pressures continue to strain the district's budget. That pressure may make it harder for the district to maintain staffing, student supports programs, and the overall quality of educational opportunities. And there were 96 related responses specific to budget, finances, and around in that. So some of those may have been tied together. So you can see like right up here, this one, budget and enrollment will continue to be challenges. So they were counted for both. Our next one was maintaining strong and relevant learning opportunities could be a significant challenge for Northfield Public Schools as academic support, rigor, curriculum quality, and access to a broad range of programs all need continued attention. The district also needs to navigate tensions around inclusion in school culture while ensuring students with different needs, interests, and perspectives feel supported and well served. So you can see that was identified as one of the strengths. And I think there's just concern over what, if it will be able to continue or not, due to some of those funding questions that we're seeing. So there were 60 related responses to that. And those were all of the challenges that were identified, that there was enough of a response about those to be identified. So the next question was what does the next superintendent need to know about the history of the school district and community to be successful? And the highest theme was Northfield is a community with a strong history, a close connection to its schools, and a broad mix of backgrounds, viewpoints, and expectations. Success in the district depends on understanding both the community's commitment to high quality education and the strong opinions and traditions that continue to shape local expectations. And there were 65 related responses to that. Then the next area identified was Northfield expects a superintendent who's visible, able to bring strong relationships across the district and community. Success in this role depends on leading with integrity, listening carefully, communicating clearly, and balancing collaboration and transparency with the confidence to make difficult decisions when needed. And there were 56 related responses to that theme. The next one was Northfield's community is deeply invested in its schools and remains an active, supportive partner in the district's success. And there were 28 related responses to that one. And then for any additional comments, there was only one theme that was identified. There were 25 related responses to Northfield's next superintendent needs to be a strong, ethical, and approachable leader who communicates clearly, listens well, includes others in the process, and can thoughtfully navigate the district's complexity and fiscal realities, which sounds almost identical to that leadership profile. So that was a kind of a brief overview. I know you have the full report in front of you. I am going to stop sharing that and just check in with all of you to see, based on that, I guess my first question is, did you see anything in there that surprised you?
Nope. I just had a question. When you looked at the alignment, the quantitative data that you did, like, obviously it was pretty strong alignment between the community and the board. I think 5 of the 6 areas overlap. Was that typical, atypical? Was that based on your experience?
Yeah, it's typical to have alignment. The fact that yours was so aligned is not necessarily typical. So usually you'll see in categories, usually you'll see 2 to 3 maybe that aren't exactly the same. They come up in multiple categories, but not necessarily to that degree. And the fact that you had, I think, 4 categories where you had at least 4 or 5, you know, identified exactly is a little bit unique. Yeah.
Okay. So it suggests that, right, the community and the board are aligned, at least in terms of where we think kind of those top skills lie. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. This is the other Amy in the room.
Yep.
So my question is, as you look at other communities, do the same things come to the top as this pretty standard set of answers, or are we unique in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would say it's pretty common to see a lot of support for staff. That one is usually pretty common. And then almost always for a challenge, there's going to be something about budget. That is very common as well. The declining enrollment is we see a lot of fluctuations in enrollment, but I think it's more common to have the specific finance piece than all of the enrollment comments that were in there. But I mean, that comes up sometimes, just not as often. That one's a little bit more unique. I'm trying to think of what all of those other ones were. But the programs, I think you usually hear about the community being supportive, but not to the level that we heard in this. And then also high expectations. We heard a lot about high expectations in the survey as well, and that's unique. we don't typically hear that as often. So I think those are the things that kind of stood out for me that are not as common. Are there any other questions or comments? And I want to give you guys time to discuss if you feel like you want to discuss the report at all.
Yeah, Amy, my question is about the amount of people who responded. Were you surprised by that number, or did you feel like that was right on target? I was expecting a lot more participation overall. The survey was open, you said 12 days.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have to say, it's lower than what we would have expected. I think for a district your size, we would have expected to see closer to 450 responses at a minimum. And so the fact that there were only 250 is surprising. there's a few different reasons that can contribute to that. So sometimes it might just mean things are going really well in the district. You know, when things are sometimes when there is some unsettled, some things that are unsettled or some unrest, or you know, if people aren't trusting as much, or if there's just something going on, we see a much higher participation. So if there is a lot of maybe that could contribute to it, that things are, people are kind of at ease with what's happening, and so that could contribute to it. It also was not, I mean, it was only open for not even 2 weeks. So again, that could be part of it as well. But yeah, I think we were kind of surprised. I know that the word was getting out. It wasn't that, you know, emails weren't getting sent out or anything like that. And so I can't say specifically what contributed to it, but yes, it was fewer, a lot fewer than what we would have expected normally. Yes.
Thank you.
And I think it was over spring break as well, so people might not have been paying as much attention.
Definitely. That can definitely contribute to it.
I'm good. I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Looks like we're ready for the next step.
All right, sounds good. So the next piece for you is to talk about and discuss whether or not you're going to have additional stakeholder input in the interview process. I also wanted to touch on that when we met the first time when we did the planning meeting, I had talked about a couple of those other engagement opportunities that we were doing. So we did the Q&A with MSBA, where we did a live Zoom session and people could submit questions about the superintendent search process. So they were able to submit questions ahead of time. I answered them on the live Zoom, and then we sent the recording to the district, and it's posted on the district website. And then also I did a search preview meeting with the district leadership team. And so I did that via Zoom on March 11th. Let's see here. And during that meeting, it did come up. They asked about the interview process and what that was going to look like. And I explained that the decision on whether or not there would be additional input has not yet been made at that time, because we talk about that tonight. And they wanted me to relay that they had a very strong recommendation that there should be additional stakeholder input during the interview process. They felt pretty strongly about that, and thought that it was important to get information from staff and also parents. They thought it was really important to also include parents or community members in that as well. So that was their recommendation. I said that I would definitely pass that along. And then they also shared with me some traits that they had identified that they were looking for in the next leader as well. And so we'll be using that information in our when our service providers are doing screening of the application process. We'll be using that information when we're doing that as well, along with the public input survey report and with what the board has identified as priorities as well. Okay, so the next thing to then discuss is whether or not you want to have additional input in the interview process. I am going to share this page. Hopefully that came up. Can you all see the public input during the interview process sheet?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the search process with MSBA allows for 3 different options. And so the first option is to rely on that public survey report to represent the constituent voices throughout the interview process. The second one would be to create interview committees, and those would be different groups that would be, brought together to hold separate interviews that the board would not be a part of. We MSBA typically recommends against doing that, because then there's information that the board doesn't necessarily have. And so I talked to you guys about that briefly during the planning meeting. And if you want me to go into more detail about that, I can. But that one, we would need to do interview training with all of those members, and we'd have to work through how we're going to do questions and what that whole process is going to look like, and how you would want to receive feedback on that. The third is kind of a compromise, and this one I have seen more and more often happening, where you would invite those representatives instead of holding their own interviews, they would be coming to the board's interviews and providing feedback on the candidates in that process. And there's a couple of different options for that as well. You can do it sharing strengths. You can, depending on the size of the group, there's a few different types of feedback that you can get. So I don't want to go into too much detail about all of them until we kind of know where you guys are thinking and if you have questions about that.
I have a question, Amy.
Mhm.
Right now, we already record we video record all of our meetings. Is this something that we can do for the interview process? Can we record them and post them and then have a link to public feedback if they watch an interview and they have comments?
Yes, that would be something that you could do. Typically, we would recommend that if you were going to do that, that you wait for round two, because then you've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 finalists. It sometimes what we like to have happen is if people are going to provide feedback on a round of interviews, we want them to be at all of the interviews so that they're able to compare. And if you do an online recording, you have no way of monitoring whether or not they've been at attendance to all of them. And so there may have skewed and uneven results. You don't know if they just watched one and provided feedback, or they really like that candidate and so they're just going to give feedback on that candidate. It's a lot harder to monitor, but it is something that you could do if you want to. We would suggest that you not live stream interviews because it could give a candidate who's later in the process an unfair advantage. And so we would recommend that you not live stream them. If you are going to record them, we would also suggest that once you decide um, who is going to be moving on, that and it would change the process a little bit. I should touch on that. But once you decide who is moving on, we would say you'd only want to post those recorded interviews, and then once you get through the next phase or the next round of interviews, you'd only want to have who then your finalists would be selected. You'd want to take the other ones off. If you did it, it would probably be a really hard lift technically, but I don't want to speak for your tech crew because they would want to get it live streamed. I mean, they would want to get it recorded and posted pretty quickly so that you can receive feedback before you make that decision. Typically, you'll make the decision that evening after the interviews. So you'd have to have a pretty long break to give people time to watch those interviews. So I guess that would kind of depend on you guys if you wanted to have a break or do a recess and come back the next day to make that decision or not.
So number 3 that you have, the people are physically there at the interviews, and then they can provide their input through an online form immediately.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't, yeah, when you kind of brought that option up, Amy, Amy Garrett, Amy in the room. um, you know, yeah, I hadn't really appreciated kind of the time dimension to it, as well as like somebody could just pop in and be like, well, I don't like that. And it's not really as participatory, I think, is the intent behind number 3, right? Or 2 for that matter. I mean, I think 2 is sort of where Northfield is just sort of given to go, right? We want to be as inclusive as possible and things like that. But I think there's one thing that gives me confidence in kind of looking at a number 3 is just that alignment between the board and the community survey results, right? Like we saw, 5 out of 6 areas we were in kind of complete agreement. So, the board's an elected representative body of the community overall. We're here. One of the most important things we do is hire this position, right? And we're functioning as that representative body for the community. So to me, participation is important. Number three probably feels like the most kind of the best balance between representativeness in addition to the elected officials that sit on the board, and some participation from the community and getting feedback in a time frame that's probably useful. The one question that I have on number three is kind of right around that first sentence, and that's invite representative groups to send one person. Amy, not in the room, Amy online. Talk us through kind of what that process looks like, because anytime you invite one person to represent a group, that's always a little dicey. So, or it just can be challenging at times. So, what does that look like?
Absolutely. So I just changed the screen. I want to make sure, did it update for you, audience input groups to consider?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so what that looks like, there's a few different ways. So it's of course up to the board. Who do you want represented? We want you to think in terms of getting a cross section from the district. So who is that? What does that mean? You guys know your district far better than I do. But typically this is what some of those, what we've seen happen in the past is these are some of those groups that you want to consider. Typically what we would have them do is send out an email to the groups, let them know that they have been, invited to participate. And then we can do it a couple different ways. They can just select who they want to represent them, or people from that group can put in their name and submit that they want to participate. And then it would be a random draw of those names.
I have a related question. If these are public meetings, can't anybody who wants to come?
Absolutely. Anybody who wants to come should come.
So,
Anybody who wants to watch the interviews is definitely welcome to attend. And you could just do whoever's there can provide feedback instead of selecting groups. You could just say anybody who's in attendance can provide feedback and we give it out for everybody. That would be another option.
because I could see value in making sure all of those groups are invited, all of our unions, that they know that this is happening, and encouraging them to send one or more people to come because it's an open meeting. I don't get the sense we're going to get 200 people, but if we got 50, that would be amazing. And it's probably closer to 30.
I guess my question there is one of logistics. So I'm thinking just for the final round, maybe there's 2 or 3 candidates. They interview back to back. We ask people to give us feedback. 30 people maybe give us feedback. 1, 2, 3, and then we have to read all of those comments and deliberate. Right now, we have it scheduled to happen right after that. So I guess I'm not opposed to people offering feedback. I wonder though if that would address the other question, which is, does the community, or the administrators, people who you spoke to, Amy, are they hoping to contribute their questions? I mean, you can sit in the room and listen to us ask our questions, but are people hoping that they'll get to ask what's important to them? And I think that's where I'm not leaning really towards anything, but I think if it were to be number 2, that allows people to kind of have their interests represented in the questions, and I think that's where I guess is that what, Amy, you felt was of interest to the people you spoke with?
So I think initially, yes. And then we didn't circle back around to it after that. And so I believe that they were looking at being able to, because they're so used to, my understanding is that what has, happened in the past, or what traditionally happens with some of those administrative positions, is that you do interview committees. Just because it's what's always been done in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing to do, but it's also not something to not consider. You definitely should consider what it would mean if you're not doing that. That's definitely something to think about. But again, I do want to always stress that you are the board, and you are the elected officials, and you are the only hiring authority. Um, as far as the input, if you do the input, you can have them do um, where they're providing comments, like on the, identifying the strengths or areas that might need improvement. Or what I've had a lot of boards do lately is they have them fill out an online form very similar to what the board will be filling out. So they'll be rating the responses to each question with E, they exceeded their expectation, M, they met their expectation, or D, they were disappointed in that response. And then sometimes with the audience input, then we also have one comment box at the end so they could put an overall perception or an overall thought of the candidate in there, or any additional comment that they wanted to have. So then that kind of limits all of the reading that you have to do. And when you have the compiled results of the EMD, it's a really quick snapshot. So I've had boards kind of leaning towards that and doing that more often now. And so that would be an option. You wouldn't have to have it all be comments, but I think it's nice to provide that additional comment box because it gives them the opportunity to give an overall response on that candidate as well. We also like that because it's anonymous, and so especially if you have staff in the room, right? This is potentially their boss, and so we want them to be honest in how they're responding to or what they think of the candidate and not worry about how that might affect them. And so we have it go through our system so that you're just given the total responses instead of broken out by the staff member or by the specific, the parent rep said this or so that it kind of just protects all of the parties involved as well. As far as questions go, sorry, there was a multi-part question that you had. So there would be typically we can also do um, we there would be an option if you wanted to do the number 2. I could make a form where people could submit questions, and then I can bring them to after round 1 when you select who's moving on to round 2. We decide on those round 2 questions that night, and I could bring them to that so that you could decide if you want to use any of those questions in your interviews.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, Jeff here. Comment I have is, I mean, I think it's a board decision. We're representatives of the community. I mean, I would prefer to have, make the candidate feel comfortable too, like talking to the board. And, I mean, I'd prefer more of a, if we get some questions, just kind of somehow submit them that we could ask and kind of like, it seems to me if it's too much public, you got people, coming from all different groups, all different ways, putting in their questions and feedback. But I think if they want to, submit some things, especially when you're getting down to the last few people. But I mean, out of a traditional interview, I mean, you're obviously giving us some things. I mean, what's been done, and what would you say is the traditional interview process for, this type of thing in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years?
Sure. So I would say the traditional method, you're saying traditional methodology as far as of engagement,
Yeah,
correct?
interviewing and then, talking to the board, the candidate.
Yep, absolutely. The traditional methodology is definitely doing the interview committees. That's what it was for years and years and years. Um, we have just because it has been the traditional methodology doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best or the most equitable or the best input for you. I want to make sure that the input that you're getting is going to help you make your decision. And so that's why I'm talking through, you have different options for how you want to receive that information. I would say in the last 4 years for sure, there have only been 2 districts that have done interview committees, and we have 4 MSBA. And our searches include districts from as small as 200 students that we've done searches for up to, 29,000 students. And so in that range, the largest district that we um, have worked with, they didn't have any additional input. They went with option 1, where the report was the voice of the constituents because it was the most equitable. It's the one where nobody's voice is elevated over anybody else's. And so that was their decision to do it that way. I'm not saying that that's what you guys should do. I'm saying that that's what other boards have selected. I've had a lot of boards do the option 2 because they're seeing all of the same information. Whereas when you have interview committees, they might be sending you a response, but you're not necessarily at those meetings. So you don't, if a candidate goes in and interviews with, let's say they're interviewing with a group of parents and community members, and they they just blow them away. They're very charismatic. The parents in the community love this candidate, and then they come for your interview, or they do an interview with the administrative team, or a staff group, and they do awful. um it kind of puts you in a hard position because you don't want to move that candidate on, and now that group may have a you know it kind of can set the new superintendent up to not be in a good position because you might have a group that's not happy with them, or vice versa. So it's just a tricky situation to do.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for any, whatever else, but I just kind of wanted some
Mhm.
more feedback of what, if we pick out of the 3, what direction
Mhm.
we're going in.
Yeah, in the last 4 years, I would say most are doing 1 or 3. We've only had 2 districts in the last 4 years that have done option 2.
Sorry, just a quick question for Amy Jordan. The bottom of the screen, the sentence that you've got projected here says the number of participants should not exceed 15, ideal group size is 7 to 10. So if you kind of think about that sort of DME approach for rapid feedback, what's sort of the thinking there in terms of group size?
That's definitely if you're going to be doing comments. If you're going to have them identify strengths and weaknesses, just as the other board member spoke to, that's a lot of information to read in a very short amount of time. And so you wouldn't want a very large group. If you're going to have them do the EMD form with 1 comment box, we do a limited character comment box. They get and that's worked out really nice because you're getting a lot of information in a quick amount of time. But that's why that's if you're going to have them do the strengths or areas of weakness, because you're potentially having 6 comments per person who is giving feedback per candidate. So it does get to be a lot of information to cover.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
And I wanted to make sure that we heard from everybody on this piece. Personally feel like we appreciate and want community input. What that looks like, I'm not sure. That's what we're here to discuss. I really like the option 3. That is, as it's worded, it would be input on the finalists. And so I want to ask Kelly or Val if you want to give any comments about your experiences over the years, or maybe if you were, I assume you were at that meeting, if you want to speak to that. I would like to hear that Amy Jordan captured those comments fairly accurately. That's what my sense of it is. But since you're here, you can also speak to that. And then I want to make sure that Corey and Jenny give their opinion on including community input in the way that it's presented in option 2 or 3, or maybe you all would prefer option 1. But let me encourage Val or Kelly to give some comments first.
Sure. This one's on, right? I really wish my light worked. So yes, she captured what the administrative team recommended. I would say it might be helpful if it's okay if I just provide a quick summary of how we do our interview process right now. We just got done doing 2 principals, and so I think it might provide context for the board of what administrators and staff in the community would hope for. And I think it aligns pretty well with number 3. And I'll talk a little bit about the scoring and the feedback component as well and how we do it. So for the principal interviews, we had 64 applicants that we brought 15 people in for phone interviews. And that had a committee that had parents, staff members, and administrators on. I would say probably in that 15 range. Kelly probably knows the exact number. And then that was recommended down to 6, and then 6 finalists were brought in. We had a Bridgewater team and a Spring Creek team. So I sat on the Bridgewater team as a parent and an administrator in the district. And I would say there was at least 15 people in each of those groups. So one comment I heard Amy talk about was having the same people. We actually don't do that because you get more input and feedback. More people can feel involved in the process. And so the way we do it, one person, the administrator running it, asks all the questions. The questions are preset. We don't allow any of the members to ask questions because we want each candidate to have the same experience. That's important. And then, so I literally sat there and I took notes on all 6 candidates that we interviewed, same questions. And then we had an electronic form at the end of the day that said, please rank each candidate against the ideal. So not against each other, but your ideal candidate. So that's how we do it. And then there is a text box for comments if you have it. So no strengths, weaknesses, it's whatever people chose to type in. So there's a quick, where does this person rank, right, comparatively? So there's a quick data point, but then there's also additional context that you can read into, but I do believe it's fairly limited. And I will say every single interview committee that I have been on, the first point is this is the superintendent's decision, right? Obviously, this is going to be the board's decision, but that's framed up front for everybody when they're invited in, right? We want your feedback. We want to hear your thoughts and comments, but this is my decision. It's pretty rare for the decision to not align with the majority of the group, but that is very clear up front. And so I think that is my perception on what I feel pretty comfortable speaking for all the administrators. I won't speak for all the staff in the community, obviously, but I don't think we're looking for specific questions. I'm certain there's people that are looking to ask specific questions. As an administrative team, I think we want to just be involved in the process to say, because how the candidate interacts with the board versus me on a day-to-day basis versus a parent versus a student, those are all very different interactions. And so I think it's helpful just to have the different perspectives and lenses. But there's nobody that's questioning that that's your decision at the end of the day. That's a very clear protocol that I think everybody in this community would be already expecting. So that's how we run it. I think that's what the admin team is looking for. I think inviting specific people, and I do think if you have the metric, I think limiting it to 7 to 10 might be difficult, but I agree with Amy, right? If you're asking for lots of, subjective comments, that's hard to read through, but a more streamlined would offer more opportunity for people. So that's my initial thoughts, but just so you can have a perspective of kind of what our team goes through on a regular basis when we're hiring.
Thank you. Kelly, did you want to add anything?
I just have one clarifying comment. I agree with Val. She said that we don't invite the same people back to do the interviews. What she meant is that we have one group of people who come in and they help with interview round 1, And then we have a different group of people that come back and do interview round 2. So in this situation, if we have interviews on a Friday night and a Saturday, we would want those same people to be at all of round 1. So they would need to be here all of Friday and all of Saturday. Then we could potentially have a different group at the finalist interviews on Wednesday.
Okay.
I knew that was what you meant.
Val, can I ask a clarifying question? You
Absolutely.
You said, how a candidate interacts with the board might be different than how they interact with administrators or parents or it's one interview, right? I mean, so I think what we're talking about is a single interview process. And I would argue interviews are horrible ways to actually hire people. So the reality is that, you're not going to have that type of interaction, with just parents or with just administrators kind of in the way that we have this set up. But okay, I just wanted to
So from my perspective, yes, I understand that and totally agree on all the things. But I think from my perspective, you can read a lot in an interview from body language, from the word choices that they're using, and I don't expect one person to pick up on all the things, right? And so I think that's sometimes where I'm like, oh, hey, that answer wasn't actually correct about the funding, right? You may or may not know that, but I would, right? And so I just think those different interactions and the level of detail and the perspective people come at are different. And that's where if I rank someone low and you rank them high, that's a good thing to say, where's the disconnect, right?
Right.
And so having dedicated people here that you can have that conversation with, I think is worth it. But there's pros and cons, all the ways you look at it, for sure.
And can I ask a quick question from Amy Jordan? So when you think about, and I know we're going to eventually sometime this evening get to figuring out what those interview questions are, but are we using, exactly. Are we using the EMD model for scoring for those? Is that essentially the intent when we get to that interview round? Okay. Yeah.
Correct.
Because I can see some advantage in sort of using the same scoring rubric if you're going to obviously solicit input from a variety of entities for the same questions. That makes intuitive sense, but I just wanted to ask the question.
Great.
Yep. And I just want to add on one piece to just keep in mind is that typically we will recommend you not rank candidates because rankings are public information. And so that would have to go out. And so we don't want to rank the candidates. And then also keeping in mind that whatever feedback you do receive is public information because you're receiving it as a board. And so that's why the process might need to be a little different. Just keeping that piece in mind because the information you'll be receiving versus what Dr. Hillman receives for a principal position or an administrative position, it's so.
Good. Okay, Corey.
Thank you. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective, Al. I was actually going to ask you to share that because I think there's been some misperceptions about the level of depth and engagement that administrators and parents and students have had in those interviewing committees. So I appreciate you clarifying that. I'll just say I also agree with option 3 for those reasons. And I also from my own perspective, I took your comment about the experience being more about the experience bringing to the table rather than having individual interviews or such. So it was more about perspective. So anyway, number 3 is where I would land.
All right. Jenny, do you want to give a comment?
Yep, thank you. I am just really wanting to stay at number 1 because in considering number 2, I keep going back to that unfair and potentially deep resentment part, which I didn't think of before, and I feel terrible because normally I think of people and their feelings, but that hit me hard because that's not just going to happen if we call it a hiring committee. I think it could happen no matter what we call it. because we have like 22,000 stakeholders in our community, and this is the leader of all of our schools, not just of one building that we'd be hiring. And so essentially I see that as a much bigger aspect here. And I keep thinking I don't want to exclude people's feelings and trying to say, well, we can have this little exclusive group here. And although I see that its intent is to be very helpful in this process, and believe we could probably use all the help we can get. That I agree with, but I just keep coming back to that unfairness, and I can't shake it off. So then it would be similar issue with number 3 is inviting groups and sending one person. The interviews are already open to the public, right? Anyone can come. So that's already open. So we're already allowing the public. I mean, if all 22,000 have an interest, I mean, so we're already allowing that to happen. So it's not like we're closing it off. But I think that in narrowing it down to just a certain group or a certain person to observe is just unfair. And I don't want to take the chance that there would be any resentment like that. And going on social media and saying, well, the process they had was they selected this one person or this one group, and that really wasn't fair. And I just don't want to divide. I don't want to provide the potential for that division. So I really am stuck with just number 1.
Can I ask a question about, so the first round of interviews, people could come and then, can you just clarify, those candidates are not public? And then, but if people email us and say, Joe Smith was really great, I saw it during the interview, does that become, like, is that public?
They are public.
Okay, so the first round.
Round 1 is public.
Okay. All right,
Yes.
thank you.
And so the suggestion is that that first round, we have the interviews, people can be in the audience, but there's a recommendation to not live stream that meeting. And if we did, or say we recorded it, then the suggestion is to put that recording, post it later, much later, so that candidates don't have an unfair advantage. Did I capture that, Amy?
Correct. Yep. And typically we would just have you post the ones that you select to move on. If you're going to post the recorded, if you record the interviews, you might interview 6 people, you might choose to move on 3, and you would just post the recordings for the 3 that you move on.
Mhm.
Is what we recommend if you're
Right,
going to do that process.
Yeah. And then did you want to make a comment, Corey? Okay. Amy, how are you feeling about the community input?
So I'm sort of on the fence between 1 and 3 right now. I really was listening to what you were saying, Jenny, and I understand the sense that 1 was sort of the fair, everybody who respond has sort of an equal voice in it. I appreciate that. But 3, we then will elevate some voices if we do 3, but there are people like Val. I would love to have her opinion on whether the guy has any fiscal sense, or the gal, or the applicant. So I would appreciate being able to have some people with expertise here who could identify issues that we might not notice. So the problem is, who do we choose? And, but I also think we have the tradition in our district to have more people involved in a decision. And so there will be people who aren't satisfied with us only relying on that community survey. So how do we not elevate those voices that are part of a committee too much, but try to take in what we learned from the survey as well? Because I think we'll start the survey will get sort of left behind at that point, and we'll just be hearing from the committee. But going with that, I could see inviting certain people to come as representatives makes a lot of sense because we're following our own tradition. And then looking for discrepancies from what we see. If some, like I've had 2 times in my life where I've had supervisors who are really glib, who really can talk a good line and are very, very convincing, but they really didn't know anything. And and so I would like to avoid that situation. Having lived through that twice as an employee, it's very difficult. So that's why having people with expertise would be important as well.
And I think not just expertise, but the perspective piece of it, just to make sure to add that. Corey, did you want to say something?
No, that's a great point. It isn't just about those who can suss out financial acumen. It's about a teacher or a parent or a student sitting there sharing their feedback. And I guess just to reground us, ultimately, it's the 7 of us to make this decision, and this input is part of that conversation. And I don't think by excluding more voices, that's actually going to help us. I think you're going to actually create more of a rift. I think we have to consider the impact to staff and the community if we decide to remove that part of this. And certainly, there's already been comments that it would have been nicer to see greater responses to the survey. We don't know why. It is what it is. But I think by following the tradition that we've had here, especially now that we have new context, that it's not as robust that some of us maybe had been concerned about the involvement and maybe foregoing some of our own responsibility by bringing more people to the table. This is really a very short, solid loop of feedback that we can construct. And because of especially the nature of it being over 2 days and having to deliberate immediately after, recording it and putting it up for feedback, I think, is not a wise idea. Having 30 people is not a wise idea. Having 15 people and getting concrete response of ranking them against the application and, however we want to go about that is the wise thing to do. Amy had the list of potential invitees. Some of those things were delegated to the unions themselves, the groups themselves. I'm sure Kelly would help fill in the other pieces. We heard from Val tonight that of the 15 spots that were open for each principal team, they had 64 applicants, I believe the number was. So clearly there's an interest and desire to be involved in these conversations. But ultimately, just as those decisions fell on Dr. Hillman, these decisions will fall on us. But I think it's important to hear the community, all perspectives of the community. So I would strongly encourage this board to go with number 3.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I think the point that Jenny raises is valid, though, in the sense that whatever that process is, I think has to feel fair in terms of who that representation is. Otherwise, it's easy to criticize. Well, like you invited so and so, but not.
But if we invite nobody, that's also going to be
No, yeah, for sure. So now I'm going to ask. Now I'm going to ask Amy Jordan. So where have you seen that done well in terms of that invitation process? And part of me feels like, making that process somewhat random gets the equitable piece, right? Because then everybody has sort of an equal chance to be, or, if you kind of do that in categorical ways. So walk us through where you've seen that done particularly well, Amy.
Sure. So, I would typically recommend that you send an invitation to, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, and they can select somebody. Sometimes they won't have somebody come. As far as staff goes, I think the board should discuss like how many representatives per what, because that will kind of play into it as well. So sometimes you'll have, a student representative. Do you want just one student or 2 students? How many parents do you want? Sometimes we've seen them invite like, how many PTOs do you have? Invite one rep from each PTO to serve as a parent rep. And so they select who wants to do that, and they can send the email out or a notice to their group and then say, if you're interested, send it to Amy. Like I have an email that I can use, and then they send it to me, and then I can do a random draw for each of those roles. That seems to be the least amount of pressure that I've seen is when it is done like that, where you're invited to send a representative. Anybody who is interested should fill out this form, and then you do that random draw from that. Um, but keeping in mind that you definitely want, I mean, if there are certain staff members that you really want input from, I would consider that because because for example, some of them do have a lot of expertise. So I would also consider that. I've worked with some boards that have just done that, like they'll flat out say we want our district leadership team, and that's it. And they'll just have the district leadership team. You could do a district leadership team. You could do, somebody from the chamber to get some city representation, and you could do like PTO members or some students. I think it's really you guys. I would maybe talk to, like, Val has a really good handle on who they've used for these types of things before. And I think that experience that with what you guys have done in the past to get a good cross representation, I would consider that information and then try to think through who else might be missing. Because if that's kind of what you have done, it sounds like you haven't had a lot of, I mean, pushback from that. So maybe that's a good way to, to get that information. But otherwise, we use this list as a good base for starting to think through who needs to be represented. But also keeping in mind, you don't want your group to get too large, but if we do the EMD with a comment box, you can handle more information and get more input. Then the more people you have, it might drown out some of those voices um that you're really hoping to get, and there's a lot of benefits and, and pitfalls to all of it. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm helping enough.
Amy, are we needing then, and I'm not saying we're done with this conversation, but if the board felt that they could live with, say, option 3, which is the option that I'm advocating for, but I'm only one voice, do we need to decide tonight with you what the logistics of that option look like? I'm looking at.
I would need to probably know within the next few days so that we can get those invites sent out and start gathering the information back. It wouldn't have to happen tonight, but I'd say for sure at the latest by our next meeting, because we also want them to hold the dates and make sure that they're going to be available to participate. But I would say by April 16th at the latest.
Okay. And to be clear, on option 3 is different than option 2 in that individuals do not need any training. They can just show
Correct.
up. And then you had also mentioned that one scenario is whoever's in the room can fill out that evaluation form, if you will, and then we keep it to a very simple form. So there is a range there of invited, anybody who comes can participate, and that's something for the board to give it their opinion on.
Could I make a proposal?
Well, I want to make sure that people are. I know I heard Jenny, you say you were really sitting on one, and I'm gonna
If I can clarify.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you clarify, and I'm gonna offer also that I came in with option 1 on my mind, and then in my position as chair, I've had access to even more personal opinions. Where people found me, they came to me and they gave me their opinion about the tradition and custom and the way that we do things in Northfield, and they really helped me move away from option 1 and look for something like option 3. So I just wanted to offer that. I agree with you, and I've also, because I've heard other voices, have also processed a little bit longer.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to say I would be more than excited if number 3, if we had, as Amy mentioned, the expert, I think you used the word expert. I like that word a lot, which is not mentioned in this paragraph. It made me think, well, it's just going to be anybody. I mean, so then you're going to have a free-for-all, and then you're going to have people upset. But no, if it's an expert, or if it's a Val or Kelly or someone in that group, see, there's only one Val and one Kelly, so nobody can really feel like it was unfair. There's nothing to contend with there, versus if you picked a teacher, okay, now, and only one, now you can say, wait a minute, so then why did the others not, why did that particular one teacher get picked? And so I definitely like the idea of sending, someone like Val or someone in a position where there's not going to be a lot of other people that felt that they were in the same boat as that person, but why didn't I get picked? Or you're not going to have that as much if you go with kind of the experts or the leader or people who are already in some type of leadership position.
Right, and Amy had mentioned something about some districts only invite their leadership team, and that's it. So
Yeah.
obviously we can do whatever we want, but we do need to make a decision.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Could I provide just a little bit of clarity on how, so we do actually set up the interview committee to say we think we need at least one teacher from each grade level, one or, 3 parents, 2 administrators. Like we make a list and then send out, if you're interested, and then fill in everyone we can. If there's multiple, we'll do like a random, assign a number and assign it randomly rather than just picking and choosing. We take in demographics to say, are we missing something? Do we need to invite intentionally to make sure we're covering that? So it is just for extra context that we do say like, here's the kind of profile we're looking for, and then try to fill that the best that we can.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It can be.
I'm always
It's
trying to
not
cut
terrible.
people's workloads down a little bit, but if everyone is on board with that and they don't think they're causing any extra workload, then I would absolutely be on board with that process too.
Right, Maggie?
I support option 3, but the way I read it was that we actually just invite the groups and then they choose who is sent. So we're not saying you ex-teacher are coming. It's the union that's saying this is who we want to send. So if that's what we would do, that's what I would support.
Okay. How do you feel about that, Amy?
I am voting for the Val version of it, where we intentionally choose people with the expertise and the demographics and choose a committee that we want. So, and then try to, through them, hear all voices.
Right, and and then the possibilities include, obviously, we can work this however we like, but one of the possibilities is, oh, I read that wrong. I thought that said leadership from the district, but
So, yes.
district administration staff is one of the groups that we could,
And it's kind of a combination of the two. I think it's a hybrid. So if we say we need a custodian there, we can either, if we think there's a custodian who is particularly experienced that we should hear from, we could ask that person specifically, or we could ask the custodial union to choose someone. So it could go both ways.
Okay. Jeff, how are you doing with the discussion?
Yeah, I just think as far as your groups and to kind of go along as far as what we're doing on that, but I just, to make sure that, we're reaching out in the groups to get to the parents, that they're included in that. So it's just a matter of checking all the boxes that people have an opportunity. So I think that, we're kind of, looking at the one, but, moving towards the 3, and, I don't want to get too many people involved, but I do like the way you do interviews to validate your input. There you go.
Good. Okay, it sounds like we're reaching a consensus on option 3. And I just want to check in on it. This particular option, the way it is written out, is that that scenario where our audience includes people we've invited in whatever format we choose, and it would just be at the finalist interview. And I know that the way that we've done things in Northfield, people give input from the start of the process to the end of the process, and not just on the finalists. Am I understanding that correctly? So I just want to hear from the board members, if you're feeling good about it, just receiving that type of input at the finalist selection, or if you feel like it needs to be round 1 as well. So if you want to just sit with that, or if you're ready to comment, you can just jump in.
So when we have finalists, you're talking about how many? 3?
2 to 3, right?
Yeah,
It
2 to
depends how
3.
many we want to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, that's getting down to the nitty gritty there, so.
Yeah, I would, from what I've heard, I'll summarize what I've heard so far. So we would be looking at option 3 for the finalists with perhaps Claudia, you and Val kind of working through who that group is using kind of this EMD assessment model with one comment box so that we're efficient in terms of kind of processing that feedback as the board, knowing that we need to make a decision fairly shortly after we conclude the finalist interviews. That's what I've heard, and I would certainly support that approach.
And making sure that I communicated that accurately is that the tradition and custom and expectation in this community is that people are involved in that, would be in this scenario, would be involved in round 1 as well, giving that input. So I just want to hear where you all land on that. Feel like.
Amy, just looking at the round 1 and round 2, how many people generally are in round 1? How many people generally are round 2? Do some people just have round 1 and there's a clear winner, so they skip round 2? Sort of, if you could give us some ideas of how that has worked.
Absolutely. So typically round 1 is 4 to 6 candidates. Every once in a while there's 7, not very often. Almost always it's 4 to 6 candidates, and then it's very common to go down to 2 or 3 for the second round. It has happened where there was a clear choice, and so they did not go on to a second round. We usually will recommend you do a second round no matter what, even if you think you know, because you want to see consistency as well, and make sure, if somebody was just having a bad day, right, or had something happen. And so we kind of look for that consistency. So usually we'll recommend 2 rounds, even if you think you have a clear choice. But the board can decide at any point through the process. You aren't required to do a round 2. It's pretty rare to not do a round 2, but it does happen.
Thank you, that's helpful. So we'll probably will have both rounds, and I just wanted to get a sense of that. So yeah, I definitely think we need it for round 2. And the big question is, do we want to ask a lot of people to volunteer their time on a Friday night and a Saturday
Right.
to come in for round 1? And I think there'd be people in town who might do that, but that's a big ask.
Any other thoughts?
I would just say, in my experience having interviewed, conducted many interviews over the course of my career, it's usually fairly clear, who your top 2 or 3 candidates are out of a pool of 6. So I suspect as a board, we would probably get there fairly. And I think, yeah, it's more efficient use of the community's time at that point to focus on the finalists.
I'm comfortable including them just for the finals.
Yes, I am also.
Okay. Jeff? Any? Okay, sounds like we will be including our community in the finalist interviews, and we will select 7 to 10 individuals to represent different community or district stakeholders, hoping to invite people that have a particular perspective or expertise to add to that input.
Just to clarify that, 7 to 10, were you thinking? Because what Val talked about sounded like it might be more. So do we
Right.
want to limit ourselves, or do you want to just kind of let?
Yeah, want to go as high as 15?
I think it depends on the type of feedback you're looking for.
Mhm.
If it's just going to be rate on the questions they answered,
Yeah.
I think then you can have, 15 to 20, because it's going to be a large stakeholder group if you really want to get, the input. That would be my recommendation, is to have the simpler feedback that's easier to, summarize at the end of the meeting. for quick analysis.
Oh, yeah, definitely. On that logistical piece, that's where I would land, is something more simple. It's just a matter of how many people we invite. And of course, it's open, so more people will be there than those that we invite. So we could just have that parameter, 7 to 10, not to exceed 15, and even if people feel like they need to go higher.
I like the higher number. I'm thinking more 15, but because once you start putting names together and
know.
coming up with
hard to
people,
stop.
you'll fill up that 15 really well. So I'm like 15-ish, see how it feels, and we can
Okay.
leave it up to the three of you to sort of see what would be a good representation.
I was gonna say, if the board is comfortable, I'm happy, Kelly and I can put a draft together of what we would recommend initially to provide to you, to say, here's kind of how we would consider structuring it, and then the board can go from there.
And I'm comfortable letting you and Claudia do that and just move it forward.
Sure.
Yep. Can't see Jenny's face. Feel like you can live with that? Okay. Jeff, yeah? Okay, good. All right, thank you, Amy Jordan, for walking us through that. I'm going to ask for a small recess, if that's agreeable by everyone. So we are in a special meeting, so I'll move that we recess for about 5 minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Maggie. All those in favor of a 5-minute recess, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we'll take a recess. We'll be back at 8:04, 8:06, whatever the math is. right, I'll call us back into our special meeting where we are going to move on to our next item, which is the MSBA interview training. And Amy, are you back? Amy Jordan?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, and can you see my screen with the school board interview training up?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So we are going to go through this. So you have the full version of the interview training was emailed to you. You have an abbreviated copy that was printed for you. So I have the full one that I'll be screen sharing. And I know your public copy is the full version as well. But just so much of it is policy that it's not necessary to print all of that out. So I'm going to go through it fairly fast. Um, and then I'll take questions at the end if you have any. And then we'll move on to interview questions. Okay. So to get started, I just want to remind, oh my goodness, sorry. Okay, so the first couple of pages are your vacancy brochure again. Can I zoom out or do you need it that large? Is it okay like this?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, we got printed
Okay.
copies now.
Okay, good. All right, so the first couple of pages are your vacancy brochure again. I just want to draw attention again to the reminder that the leadership profile is in there and we will be referencing it throughout the rest of the search process along with that public input survey. So if you recall the highlighted page that was in the public survey, I'll bring copies of that to your interviews so that it's just a reminder of these are what your community and your staff are looking for. This is what you said that you're looking for as a constant reminder throughout the process as well. But this is your leadership profile. And then we have the timeline again. So of course, today is the 6th. Your application deadline is tomorrow. And then we are set to meet again on April 16th. I will be virtual again. And that's the meeting. So you all will receive an email from MSBA from Shelby in my office on the 8th. And that will give you information to set up your account in our application system so that you can review all of the applications. So you'll get the instructions on how to set up your account on the 8th, and then on the 9th, you'll receive another email from her. It will have the alpha identifier list so that everybody's candidate A is the same person and everybody's candidate B is the same person. And then that meeting on April 16th is when we will be discussing those applicants in the open meeting. But again, it's private data. So we'll be referring to them as candidate A, candidate B, and so on and so forth. And just a reminder that during that meeting, you also cannot share any identifying information. And so you can't say where their experience is from because anybody can Google that and find out exactly who you're talking about. And so then also referring to candidates as simply by their letter or they, them, just to not give away even their gender. So if we can try to remember that for next week, or not next week, on the 16th, that's that meeting. We'll be doing that on April 16th. Okay, so to the interview training, of course. So all school board meetings related to the search are an open meeting. You've already heard this multiple times, and we won't be closing the meeting for any portion of the search. Balancing with that, of course, is the private data, as I just mentioned. Once you would decide who you're going to be interviewing, they are considered a finalist in definition in statute. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. It's also in the policies. And I'll show you right where that is so that you have that reference. But at that meeting, once you've made the motion to interview candidates A, B, and C, or whatever candidate letters you select, those names, I will read their names aloud at the end of that meeting. And then that's when they become public record as to their names. There's a few other additional information that also then becomes public information about the candidates as well. I'll have redacted resumes with me, or I'll send redacted resumes ahead of time so that Kelly has them if anybody needs to reference them. There really has no information on them because they're so heavily redacted. And then when I come for interviews, I'll have the redacted resumes with the finalist information. So then that stuff will become public. So just reminding you that you as the board are the only people who will have all of the information about all of the candidates. So, both state and federal law prohibit questions around protected categories. Again, your equal employment opportunity, and you do have that policy, of course, as well. Um, so, just a reminder that you can't ask any of these questions. Now, the interview questions that I'm presenting tonight are all directly related to the leadership profile. So you don't have to worry that one of those questions is going to be inappropriate, right? However, just keeping that piece in mind, if you are having any, um, during informal time. So if there happens to be a break after a candidate and they're still in the hallway, it doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, they might see somebody that they know and they're talking in the hallway. And if there's an informal conversation going on, that's when you need to be really careful that you're not a part of that. Keep any informal conversation to the weather, just to keep it appropriate. So you want to avoid asking any questions that are not specifically job related. I know this is pretty basic HR information, but of course I have to cover it. So anti-discrimination laws affect all parts of the hiring process as well. You should assume that any rejected applicant can believe that any information, any and all information that was acquired during that interview or the hiring process could be used in the hiring decision. And so also I want to remind you about your notes because your notes are subject to a data request at all as well. And so you want to remember when we're talking about interview questions, we won't necessarily be asking these questions, but they may provide that information during their interview. However, it's illegal for you to even consider it. And so you also want to be mindful of that when you're taking your notes. So, like an example I like to give is let's say you're just taking notes during the interview and you write down, just so that you can remember who is who, you write down older lady with the cross necklace. Well, now you've just violated 3 protected categories because you talked about age, gender, and also religion. So just being really mindful throughout the entire process that you're not considering any of that and that you're not asking any of it and you're not taking any notes on any of it. Okay, as far as um, the policies, so your equal opportunity, your equal employment opportunity policy is your policy 401. In here is just our model policy, but I did double check yours. Um, and you do have it and it's model policy 401. It's slightly worded just a little bit different in this policy, but it's pretty similar to what this is. And then the next policy to reference is your public and private personnel data. This is the one that states that anybody who applies for the position is private information. And it references in a couple of spots. So I'm going to skip ahead to this one where it says here that the names of the applicants are private data except when certified as eligible for appointment to a vacancy or when applicants are considered by the school board to be finalists for public employment. And then you go back to this one and it does say the finalist means any individual who is selected to be interviewed by the school board for a position. So that's why once you have made the motion to interview candidates A, B, C, or D, or whatever letters, then their name will become public. And then, of course, the other one that we always reference is your open meeting. Well, and again, I have in here our model policy, but I know um, I double checked yours and your open meeting law, open meetings and closed meetings, all of that information is in your policy 203. And that again, just reiterates that you can't close a meeting for any purpose of the process of the entire search. Okay, a couple of other considerations based upon statute. So a superintendent is a teacher for the following purposes only. So a teacher related by blood or marriage within the fourth degree to a board member cannot be employed except by a unanimous vote of the full board. So that's why I said early on in our planning meeting that if you are related to any applicants, please notify me because there are special voting circumstances. The other piece is that a teacher shall not be required to reside within the employing district as a condition to employment or continued employment. So you cannot require the superintendent to move to Northfield. And in fact, you cannot even consider it in the process. So I know how important it is for communities to have visibility and the presence, and it is an expectation, and so that can be an expectation to be visible and in attendance. However, you cannot require them to move within the district or even consider whether they are or whether they're willing to. So even if they come in and tell you during their interview, I plan to move here with my 15 kids and they're all going to go through the school system, you can't consider it. So don't even add it to your notes. And then, of course, a couple of other things that you need to employ a superintendent. And the employment contract can be no longer than 3 years. And then beginning 365 days into that final year is when you can begin negotiating any following contracts. So you have to wait until they're in their last year before you start a new one. The only special voting things that would be is if any board member ends up being remote for any of these, we have to do the votes by a roll call if they are remote for any of the meetings that we have a motion for, which would be any of the following meetings that we have for the superintendent search. We will have votes. And then, of course, that initial hire of a teacher related to a board member, the superintendent is considered a teacher for that purpose. And so there has to be that unanimous vote of the full board. Okay, on to the interview training information. So, common interview mistakes that we have seen. We don't need to worry about number one. That's already done. We already based it on the standards of superintendent work. Number 3 and 4, obviously, you're not going to violate the don't ask list. I'll be working with you on 4, the vague questions, vague answers. One thing I like to touch on is follow-up questions. So typically during the interview process, we do not do follow-up questions because, of course, they all need to be asked the same thing. If you for some reason, if the candidate doesn't fully answer the question, you can ask them to talk more about that. Can you explain that a little bit deeper, or talk about that a little bit more? So you can ask them to follow up in regards to that question. Don't change the question at all, or add to, or go to anything else. Just very specifically to talk more about that if they didn't respond deep enough, or you didn't hear what you wanted to hear. Typically, that is usually kept for just round 2 when you really need to hear, because sometimes, depending on how they're answering in round 1, that'll help you determine who you want to bring back. But you're not, of course, required to do that. Okay, for making a bad impression, the only thing I usually like to touch on is, of course, just making sure everybody's dressed appropriately, and then making sure that you guys have a kind of a protocol for cell phones. It's good to have them off. I understand everybody's adults and they may have an emergency situation, just making sure that they're silenced and they're not distracting at all. Um, those are just a couple of things I like to touch on. Don't forget, number 5, don't forget the whole picture. As a reminder, you as board members are the only ones who have seen all of the application materials, including the education history, employment history, the full resumes, letters of recommendation, responses to their questions, their transcripts, their licensing. You will have received all of our vetting recommendations and what you learn from that. You'll see who their references are. So you'll be getting a lot of information. So just don't forget the big picture. An interview is just that. As mentioned earlier in the meeting, it's not always the best, determinant as to whether or not somebody is going to be successful. It's one piece of the puzzle. So just keeping in mind that about that, you'll be learning, their responses to the interviews. At some point, you're going to have round 2 interviews. You'll have input from, some of your community and staff during that. So there's going to be a lot of information that you're getting throughout the process. So just don't forget all of that. Don't forget the whole big picture. A couple of other things. We don't worry about failure to probe motivation. Our first question usually it supports that, and it's one of the first questions in the application process itself. Don't treat the interview like a one-way street. So we want to make sure that the last question is almost always, what questions do you have for us? And it's a really important time in the process for them to learn more about the district as well. And I have a little bit more information about that in a bit, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. Incomplete notes. So as a reminder, number 8, you want to take really good notes during this, because when you are interviewing 6 candidates, let's say, by the time you get to the 3rd, 4th, 5th candidate, you don't want to forget which candidate answered a certain way for questions. So I will have hard copy forms for you to fill out during the interviews and take notes on how they responded to the questions so that you can recall that information. And then I usually have you just give it a quick mark for, an E, an M, or a D that we talked about already. And then you'll end up inputting just the E, M, or D piece into an online form. And then that's how we'll compile it so that you can have that quick snapshot of how all of your fellow board members felt that the candidates responded to the questions. And so during the interviews, you'll be taking notes. And then usually I'll recommend that you wait until you've heard from at least 2 before you enter your online results, just because sometimes you hear one answer and you're like, yeah, that was a pretty good answer. I think that exceeded my expectation. And then you hear from another candidate and you're like, oh no, that's what an exceeded response is, or whatever. And so usually I'll ask you to hold till you've at least heard from 2 or 3 before you actually start entering in your compiled or you're entering your new response to be compiled. But then again, please remember the anti-discrimination laws, that it also applies to your notes. Another thing is, don't accept the wrong fit. So just as a reminder, we don't want you to settle. If the right candidate is not in your pool, don't settle. We want you to find the right person to lead Northfield Public Schools. And so we'll work with you on whatever that means. And so I'll be here through the whole process. If that right person isn't there, we have options, and we'll get to those should we need to. We don't want you to accept the wrong person for the position. And then the last thing is, don't forget to check your bias at the door. And what we talk about with bias, of course, there's implicit bias and explicit bias. For implicit bias, we kind of refer to that as being an unconscious bias. It's just your brain doing its work, organizing information into different categories. It's usually something you're not even aware of. You're unaware of these biases. And so we want you to be aware of them. It's really important for you as interviewers to just understand that that happens, and that because we don't want you to act on any hidden biases. The explicit biases are ones that you are aware of, and um, and you, because you understand the source of them as well. So we want to just remind you to check any bias that you have at the door, be open-minded. And then also, the places that we tend to see where bias shows up during the interview process, most commonly, if it's going to show up, is around age and gender. Um, we like to call this one also familiarity bias. So sometimes, you might assume something about a candidate because they're from a certain school district, right? And so because that school district either has a really great reputation or a poor reputation, you may make assumptions about that candidate along those same lines. And so just remembering that that's not necessarily the case, and being open to all of that. And another time or another place that we typically will see bias as well is a metro versus rural when you're looking at experience. And so sometimes we'll have some of our, rural school boards who will say, somebody who's in the metro, can't connect with us or won't fit in. And that's not necessarily the case. And then vice versa. Sometimes in the metro, they'll assume somebody from a rural district might not be a right fit. And so again, everybody has different experiences. Just because of where they most recently worked doesn't mean that they wouldn't be a good fit. Okay, so deliberations. We're going to get to more about deliberations in just a little bit, but I want you guys to take some time and just read through these 3 situations and just think about how your board might handle this if this were to start happening. So I'm going to give you a few minutes and then let me know when you've all read through them. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read through them?
Yes.
Okay, okay. All right. So how do you think, and I don't think for a second that anybody on your board would say any of these things, but how do you think you would handle it if something like this were to come up?
Are we looking at scenario number 1 or comments on
Yes,
any
please.
of them? Okay.
No, on scenario number 1. Thank you.
So I think our board has pretty good at listening to each other. So I was reading this, and I guess we would try to talk more about what we see as the strengths of each candidates, and hopefully not dig ourselves in, but be open to listening to what people on both sides are saying.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's almost identical to what I usually follow up with. Is don't make assumptions. Diversity of thought is a good thing. Really listen to what your fellow board members are saying. Be open to that discussion. Just don't dig in your heels. Keep your open mind. Okay, for number 2, um, how do you think you would handle that if things are starting to get heated?
We've never had a heated discussion in the 10 years I've been on. What about you, Jeff? Have you had a heated discussion?
The night is young. No, I'm just kidding. it's been pretty civil. They always talk about a
Yeah.
lot of boards that don't get along when you talk to other things. I mean, typically Northfield's a history of, we talk, we work things out. Everybody can have an opinion, but let's work it out.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. We always say bring it back, refocus on the kids. What is best for the kids? You want to find the best leader for the kids. Obviously, if it gets heated, you can always take a recess, take a break. This doesn't happen often, but we just think it's important that you think about it. What would potentially happen? How could things go? Just so that you're prepared for it. And then number 3, what about number 3? I'm not going to put any of you on the spot. So, this is kind of a trick question, I think, because this is not going to happen. If you, as board members, are hearing things, so as a reminder, as soon as those names go public, you are going to be lobbied for and against candidates. People will be contacting you and telling you things that they heard or that they learned or whatever. You will hear things from um, people and they will be sharing all kinds of information. Um, when they are doing that, please, of course, thank them for the information, hear what they're saying, and then if there is, listen for fact. Is there any fact to it? Ask them what their source is. We don't want you to engage in the discussion or debate it. Maybe just, thank them for it, ask them their source. And then if you're hearing something that's actually concerning, you're going to bring it to me. That's what I'm here for. I will help you with that and navigate that situation. So I can tell you number 3 will not happen because we will I'll help you through that. We're going to look for trends. It might be something that I do need to investigate. It might be something that we've already investigated and we already know about. And so, if you're hearing of things that are actually concerning about the candidates, you have to keep in mind people in these positions don't make everybody happy all the time, right? For anybody in a leadership position, you can almost find somebody who's not happy with something that they've done at some point during their career. So you want to kind of keep the perspective. But also, if you are hearing those concerning things, though, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me because we'll do that, investigating for you and get back to you. We don't want board members going off on, investigative hunts. Of course, that looks bad for you to be calling around on candidates and doing that sort of thing. And so I will be happy to do that for you and look into it. And if it is something that is concerning and it's relevant and it's accurate, I will work with you on how to inform the other board members and we will take care of it the appropriate way. So it's not going to happen at the board table. No surprises, right? You just want to be really careful because you don't want to say anything that could be defamatory, especially if it might not be true. So definitely check with me, and you just want to be careful during that public meeting that we're not saying anything on record that could be wrong. Okay, the next whole bunch of pages are some potential interview questions. We're not going to do anything with that right now. Okay, so now we're looking at the candidate's turn. So the last question that you'll ask is almost always, what questions do you have for us? And keeping in mind that the candidates are also interviewing you, they're looking for the right fit as well. So overall, we know overall pool size is smaller, smaller qualified candidates, and it's a very highly competitive market. So you want to be ready to talk about all of the great things that are happening in Northfield, and then also being able to acknowledge what challenges you foresee for the district coming up. All of these questions aren't necessarily questions that are going to be asked, but I want you to take time, not now, on your own time, just take some time to read through those questions and think about how you might answer them if a candidate was to ask those questions. So typically how this will happen is when when the candidate asks questions of the board, I would usually have the board chair. So Claudia, if you would thank them and then help, decide who wants to answer that. Like just check, just facilitate the process of whoever's going to answer. Um, we want to make sure that you guys are taking turns answering questions and be sure to contribute something. So even if they, if they ask 5 questions, you don't all have to go around and answer every single question, but try to contribute at some point during that. They might only ask 2 questions. They might run out of time and not ask any questions. But if they're asking questions, try to contribute at least once during that process. You want to have a little bit of interaction with the candidates. You will be each asking questions. Once you have decided which questions we're going to ask, I'll put them into that EMD form and I'll assign board members to ask each question. And so you will, be going around and asking questions, but we also want you to contribute when they're asking questions as well. Okay, so the other piece to talk about is sample. Oh, yes. Okay. So sample reference check questions. I'm not going to spend much time on this because we'll get into more detail on this later. But as I mentioned before, when MSBA does our recommendations in our vetting process, we'll be calling the references in their application process to determine who we're going to recommend that you interview. In between round 1 and round 2, now their names are public, and we recommend that, you know, 2 or 3 board members do additional reference checks. So this kind of traditionally, before the internet was what it is, boards used to go, like 2 or 3 board members would go in and do a site visit. So if they had, like, 2 superintendent finalists, candidates that they were trying to decide between, they would go travel to their district and ask around, because, right, their names are public now. They can ask around in the community and they can ask, staff, and they can, do that. And instead of doing that, now what we do is we recommend that you do additional reference checking. You don't have to stick to their recommended list. And sometimes you'll learn more than what we're able to in our vetting process. That's also why I say, if you're hearing things concerning, reach out to me during this process so that we can look into it and investigate that for you. So just thinking through whether you think you might have time in between round 1 and round 2, take a look at your calendars and get an idea for if you think you'd be willing to, or if you'd want to do some of those reference checks. I'll ask you more about that down the road, but just thinking through that. Okay, deliberating in public. The key things here, um, is just to keep it positive. So we have a process that I'll give to you guys at our next meeting. You'll see what that whole process looks like, and we'll use it during the candidate selection. But we really want to keep it positive and strength based. Should your top candidate either decline or you can't come to an agreement on the contract, you potentially might want to offer to your second or your third choice. And so you don't want to alienate your second or your third choice. And so that's why we say keeping it strength based during the deliberations process. There is no need to criticize these leaders. They are, this is their professional career, and you're in a public meeting, so we don't need to criticize any of the candidates. So the process typically is that we will have you go around and share, 1 to 2 strengths per board member, per candidate, and then each just kind of individually do a quick verbal poll of who you're interested in hearing from again. And then you kind of look to see if consensus is already building. And if there is, you may not even have to have a further discussion on who to bring back. As mentioned, a lot of times, after the first round, it's pretty clear who your top 2 or 3 might be. And so you don't even have to go into why this person over this person, or why not this person. And so we just try to keep it really strength based. You want to treat candidates fairly and with respect by emphasizing their positive attributes. So those do's and don'ts, definitely focus on the positives. do judge them based on your hiring criteria. And again, I'll have that public input results there for you as well. You do want to judge them based on that. That's what you're looking for, and that's what your community is looking for. Again, don't let like a special interest group shape the process, because you're looking for somebody to lead the entire school district. And just remember not to discuss the candidates in between the interviews. Save that discussion until you've completed the entire interview process. And the last part of that is just the MSBA MASA model contract. And just so that you have that for your reference, it has the updated language about the Minnesota paid leave and all of that in there as well. But I believe you guys already have a handle on that and you're already working on that process. But just so that you have that, it is in there. So that is all I have for the interview training portion. Um, I went through it pretty quickly, so I just want to double check to see if anybody has any questions about anything that I touched on.
Hi, Amy. It's Amy again. I have two questions for you. The first
Sure.
is, you mentioned we shouldn't talk about the candidates until the round is over, but there would be a logical point if we're having like half the candidates in one evening and then half the next morning to actually take a little time in the evening just to sort of review what we've just heard. And so I'm just saying, is that something that would be okay to do?
So typically we would not recommend that, because you've only seen half of the pool and you're not necessarily going to be doing that before this, after the second 3 or the second 2 or however many you have on the second evening. And so if you wanted to do that, you would then want to review them that night and then make sure you reviewed the new ones before you went into your recess. So otherwise, typically you wouldn't. I will usually remind you like before you go to the recess for Saturday until Saturday, I'll remind you to, now is a good time to write down some notes. What are those key things that you liked about each candidate? Just so that they're fresh for you, instead of having you guys discuss them together.
Okay.
And then you save it for the deliberation portion.
All right, thank you. The other question I have, since we have 27 hours and 15 minutes left in the application window, can you give us some sense how it's going at this point?
I mean I can, but it's so hard because usually the last few days is when we see the most movement. And I can tell you, I I thought at the last that I looked that overall there weren't as many applicants as I expected. But also you have some really great candidates. So it's looking really good. You're gonna have a nice pool. We'll just say that.
Thank
So
you.
Amy, I
yeah.
have a question about the references part of it. I'm not clear on how we find the additional references. Are the candidates going to give us a longer list? How do we go about finding additional references?
No, I'll walk you guys through that once you guys decide who that's going to be. I'll meet with the 2 or 3 people just right after the meeting and talk you through like how to, who might you want to consider. A lot of times you'll reach out to board members, other board members that might not be serving as a reference in there, and ask them, because of course they're going to know a lot of information. And so usually we'll recommend that, somebody reaches out to board members for each candidate. Somebody reaches out to some sort of staff, either direct reports or teachers, or it really depends on the board members who are doing it. And then sometimes we'll have you reach out to like the city, like a city person. But again, it depends on, the experience level of the candidates. And so we want to, once we get to that point, I'll be able to help work you through that process
Okay, thanks.
to keep it kind of equitable amongst the candidates, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Any other questions on the interview training portion? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to the interview questions. So you each have the proposed round one interview questions. And I don't know if you've all had a chance to go through them or not. So typically what I do here is I'll give you guys time to read through them. So the proposed questions are based on your leadership profile, and then also some additional ones of things that were identified during the public input survey. And so, if you want, so unless you guys have already done something to narrow these down yourselves, what I would typically do is have you read them, and in each section, like each category, select your own individual 2 favorite questions, and then I'll go through and just do a poll and say how many picked question 2, how many picked question 3, how many picked question 4, and we can narrow it down that way. It kind of helps the process move along. So I'll give you guys time to read through them and just start selecting, 1 to 2 questions in each section.
Do you typically include in the total number?
Yeah, so for round one interviews, you want to have probably anywhere from, I'd say, 13 to 15, 16, 17, if if you need to. Any more than that, that's a lot of questions to answer in an hour. So I'd say anywhere in between, like the I don't know. I ideally I say 14 to 16,
Okay,
including the opening and closing question.
right, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Are some of you still working?
Anybody need more time? We're good to go.
All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask if you selected the question, and if you did, if you could raise your hand. On the screen, I can't see way over to the left, so I might need help confirming numbers. And then we'll narrow it down. So if we end up picking 2 in every category, plus the opening and closing, we'd be at 18 questions. So if we want to do 1 or 2 in every I think we'll just kind of see where everybody falls with these questions first. So,
And Amy,
okay.
also at 9 o'clock, we're going to need to take a vote to extend the meeting past 9 o'clock. So I may interrupt
Okay.
you. Or
Absolutely. No, not a
just
problem.
take it now? Okay, I move that we extend our meeting tonight past 9 o'clock. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Amy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll be extending the meeting past 9 o'clock. Okay, go ahead, Amy Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Oh, okay. Is everybody comfortable with the first question?
Yes.
Okay. How many of you had number 2?
0.
3,
2 of us.
4,
5.
number 5?
4 of us.
Thank you. And 6?
1.
Okay. So if you guys can look at question 4 and question 5, are you comfortable with both of those?
Yes.
I didn't hear that.
Yes, we're good.
I think
Okay, thank you.
my only 5 is the only thing I don't like about 5 is like, what does ethical leadership look like in a role of superintendent? I mean, it's kind of a cheerleader question. Like, you're not gonna get much. Like, it's like, well, blah, 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 I mean, whatever.
They're all going to say the same
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Like, I like 3 just because it gave
Yeah, me
asked
too.
about a tension between confidentiality, transparency, and public accountability. Like, you have to kind of dig deep into your experience to like think about that. Like, I'm just not a big fan of open-ended cheerleading questions, which you'll see.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have a mixture of kind of behavior-based questions and then more kind of open-ended philosophical. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
Does that change anybody's?
And among 15 questions, we're going to get a mix of
right.
types of questions.
But
Do we want to come back and see what the spread is to limit some
Yeah.
of those cheerleader questions, so-called cheerleader questions?
yeah, I mean, if there's a better thing to call them, that's just what I'm calling them. But like, I don't mean to be derogatory to
Yeah, I liked
cheerleader.
3 also, but we can
Okay.
move
Yeah,
on.
I'm open to changing that.
So 3, 4, 5.
I just don't want to deliberate every section.
Yeah.
So 3 and 4.
I think we've changed to 3 and 4.
Perfect. Okay.
3 and 4.
All right. How many of you had number 7?
Sorry, my hand.
6 of us.
Whoa.
7.
7. All right.
Jeff,
Nice.
All right. And number 8?
that cheerleader
1.
question.
9?
2.
10?
0.
11?
Why we have
3.
Val.
3.
Yeah.
Why
3?
Val's here.
I think I was missing one. I had 7 on 7, 1 on 8, 2 on 9, and 3 on 1. I mean on 11.
Yep.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Okay, so is everybody comfortable with number 7 and then maybe 11 if you want that one, or if we want to leave that as a maybe and see where we end up on numbers?
Yeah, that's fine. Let's leave that
'Kay.
one as a maybe.
Okay. For the next section, how many of you had number 12?
3,
13,
2,
14,
5,
15,
1, 2. Oh, I'm sorry, 2.
16,
1.
okay, so I'm hearing number 14 for sure, and then maybe number 12. Okay, how many of you had number 17?
3,
Number 18?
3,
Number 19?
3,
Number 20?
1,
And number 21?
4.
Okay, so I'm hearing 21, and then we have 17, 18, and 19 all with 3. And I think let's come back to those. Okay, how many of you had number 22?
0,
23,
5,
24,
2,
25,
1,
and 26?
5,
Okay, so I'm hearing 23 and 26. All right, for the next section, how many of you had 27?
3,
28,
4,
29,
2,
number 30,
1,
and number 31.
3, 3,
Okay, so I'm hearing number 28 and then maybe 27 and maybe 31. Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that one closing question as worded?
Yes.
Okay. And then for the additional questions, if you want to select 1 or 2, that's fine. How many of you had number 33?
1,
Do you want a second to read through those?
Can we get a couple minutes?
okay. Take
Yeah.
some time to read them.
I wouldn't. Yeah, just one really great.
So we're already at 10 for sure questions, and then just going back to look at the ones that had 3 if we wanted to add any questions in a certain category or not, but just an update for where we're at.
I'm good.
Ready? Jeff, you need
Okay.
another little bit? Another 30 seconds?
My interpreter.
Exactly.
Yeah, apparently.
Speak, Jeff.
Okay, are we ready?
Ready?
Okay.
Okay. How many had 33?
1,
34,
3,
35,
1,
36,
3,
and 37?
1,
Okay, so I'm hearing maybe 34, maybe 36. Okay, how many of you had number 38?
2,
39,
1,
40,
2,
3.
3,
3,
and 41,
1,
and 42?
3, 4,
Yeah, I can 5.
Okay, so I'm hearing 42, maybe 40. Okay, so if we go with that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We're at 13 total questions, just going with the ones that had 4 or more. I'll go back through and give you what those numbers were so you can mark them, and then I'll give you a few minutes I'll let you know which ones were close, and you let me know if you want to add any of those, or look at the leadership profile category and see if you want any additional for that category.
Amy, on page 4 of the survey packet, so we have the categories 1 through 6 there in the middle of the page that matched up, color coordinated, and then there was number 6 and number 4. My question is about where it says the following areas of expertise rose to the top in the public input survey, and it's highlighted budget, finance, and collaborative leadership. I didn't understand how you, how or why you highlighted those outside of that middle section.
So the bottom section, they were just also highlighted because they were identified in a different area, but because they're identified in the leadership profile to show where that alignment was.
So this,
Because they were,
so you're saying these are the leadership profile top?
so the things that were the bottom ones, there's only 3 items, right? Yep, those were also because we always pull out those just 3 of that top category. And so the ones that were highlighted were referenced already. So like they aligned with what you guys had. Because that one, the strategic planning one, it's broad, it wasn't identified in the areas of expertise. And so it doesn't say specifically if it's about doing a new one, if it's about implementing what's there, or the regards to it. That's why the questions were a little bit more broad, because I don't know at what point they're looking for in that,
Okay, got it.
because it wasn't in the other one spelled out.
Okay. I thought
So
that might help in determining what questions in those 3 or 2 categories we're considering, but I understand now. Go ahead.
so the top question, the develops trust and works collaboratively with diverse groups and communities, that's because that one was not highlighted, but it was from the apples to apples question that you guys took, and that the board took and the community took. That was one that they identified that you guys did not have identified. So that's why that one was in there specifically. Because that one was the apples to apples, and then the bottom 3 ones, the bottom 3 were the ones I already talked about.
Okay.
And so it's up to you guys if you want to include those additional questions or not. You don't need to. Okay, so the ones that we have highlighted right now are question 1, 3, 4, 7, 14, 21, 23, 26, 28, 32, 34, or 36. They were tied and they didn't have 4 on either of them. So either both or neither, or you guys can talk those through. And then 42. And then do you want me to give you which ones had 3 votes if you want to add, or do you want to just go with those?
How many had 3?
Um,
As you said, we were at, let's see, 4, 5, 9. So we're at 11. without counting the 2 3s in the first section of
Yeah.
the public.
And
ones.
I want to change one of my votes, get us up to a 4. And I voted for 33, but that's very similar to 36. So I would be happy to change my 33 vote to a 36, which gets us up to 4 on that one.
Okay.
So that's 12.
It feels like enough. I think. I mean, just to get 12's even a lot.
Yeah, there were, I think I counted 8 questions that had 3s by them, but like some of them were in the same category. Like one category, there were 3 of them that had 3 votes. I would say if anything, look at your titles, your criteria, and determine if one of those looks like you should ask another question in that category that you only have one question for.
Yeah, the one that stands out to me is number 9. I forget how many we had. That was one I voted for. I don't know where everyone else fell on that, but
2 only.
we only had 2. I think we should have something else in terms of stewardship.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, there were 3 on 11.
I mean, I prefer 9 because it's talking about competing interests, and there's a lot of opinions and voices throughout the district. And we certainly know that the coming years are not going to get any easier. So the communication piece is important, but I rather think about the internal conversations personally. But
I think I agree with that.
I can change my vote to that one too.
To 9?
Yeah, 9. 9.
So 7 and 9 in that area.
Great.
so that's 13. I'm comfortable with that number.
So because one's gonna take a while for a lot of people. That's like a 5-minute question for most people.
Yeah. Well, and the closing question too. We don't know how much.
Yeah.
One person might ask 1 question, another person might ask 6 questions of us.
Right.
So if you figure 4 minutes per question for the 12, that's 48 minutes. That gives 12 minutes for the opener and closer.
Do we get 12? I think we're at 13 questions, aren't we? Or am I miscounting?
I think you're at 13.
11 questions. I was taking out question 1 already in that math.
Okay.
But really, question 1 and 32 should be
Yeah, I see.
taken out. So that was that 11 questions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a lot, but yeah, we could try it.
It would be nice to have 14 questions because there are 7 of us, and then we each would have 2 questions to ask.
I
Just
volunteer as
saying.
tribute. I'll ask 1.
I think we would have 14 with the what questions you had for us. The opening question.
I was at 13 with the opening and closing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where did I pick up?
Claudia's first question can be their name.
Wait, can you read off? Can you read off the questions we have? Just confirm.
Oh, I think because I had mentioned earlier 34 and 36, but I think it was determined that you were just doing 36.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Do you want
34 and
both
3.
34 and 36?
I'm fine. I'm fine with that if we want to have a even distribution. I don't know if that's that important, but I'm thinking more about trying to shove in that many questions in a 60-minute time frame.
I don't care. We can drop a question. Which out of 34, 36.
Well, is it better to have like more questions prepared or just like more time?
More time.
I mean, if they feel, if the 7 of us and the candidate feels good after 50 minutes that we've done what we need to
So
do,
then I
then
vote for sticking with what we currently have.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable moving forward with just those 13 questions?
yes.
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 All right. So the only other thing I was gonna just, oops. You all have the proposed schedule. Of course, that will change depending on what you select or how many candidates you select on the 16th. And so I just wanted to clarify or give you guys a minute to look over that. Let me know if you have any questions on the schedule. And then can you confirm where the interviews are going to be held?
They're going to be here in the boardroom.
Okay.
And then the candidate would sit at the table or stand at the microphone in the corner?
I'm saying where Val is sitting is where the candidate needs to sit.
Okay. Okay.
I don't have any concerns.
All right. What was that?
I was just answering your question about the times. No one mentioned anything. I think the times are fine.
Okay. Yeah, we typically will do 60-minute interviews for round one, with like a 10 to 15-minute break between each. If the candidates are there early and we can start early, we will if you guys are ready for it. And if they're not, then they're not. And I mean the following candidates, obviously not the first candidate, because that has to follow your board time, of course. The The only other thing to think about or start thinking about is, so round one is very much about your leadership profile and what those key areas are that you've identified. Start trying to think about what types of things you might want to learn in round two. I will bring proposed questions again, a big mix of things that you haven't even touched on. I'll bring some scenario questions as options. But if there's a certain area or something very specific to Northfield that you think we should consider to have as an option for a question, please send them to me, so that I can bring questions around that for you as well. But I know we just got through round one and it's a lot easier to think of after the first night of round one. So if you think of something even that night, let me know and I can try to get it added to what we bring for round two on the second night. But that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions for me?
I do not. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
Right. Looks like we're good to go. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right. Talk soon.
Safe drive home.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we're on to item 5, which is just our future meetings. We have a regular board meeting Monday, April 13th at 6 p.m., followed by 3 special meetings, April 16, April 24, April 25. Those are all in the district boardroom, April 16th at 6, 24th at 4, and the April 25th at 3 p.m. We have a regular meeting April 27th at 6, and a special meeting April 29th at 4, both in the district office boardroom. And then finally, May 4th, a special meeting at 5:15 to approve the superintendent contract here in the district boardroom. Okay, that is all the business that we have tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second? Thank you, Jenny. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.